Hey guys, tonight we drift into the warm, sandy hush of ancient Nubia, where the sunrise lifts like a slow yawn over the Nile, and you, yes, you with the questionable sandals, find yourself trudging toward a riverside kiln that's been breathing heat since before breakfast. The air is already giving you that familiar, you probably won't survive this, desert reminder. A gentle nudge that maybe you should have brought more water or at least a hat that isn't purely decorative. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. While you settle in, I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Nubian sunrise, midnight, or something in between. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step onto a sandy path still cool from the night. The Nile glints like a long ribbon of molten bronze, just beginning to catch the sun. Birds wheel over the water, a calling out as if they're clocking in for the morning shift. Nearby, reeds whisper in a faint breeze that hasn't yet remembered its obligation to turn scorching. You walk toward the kiln, a low rounded structure built of mud brick and soot-blackened memories. Even before you reach it, you can feel the warmth radiating through the morning, like a sleepy cat stretching before deciding whether it wants attention. A couple of potters have already arrived. They stand in soft silhouettes against the brightening sky. One older, shoulders sloping slightly forward from decades of hauling fuel. The other younger, with the posture of someone who hasn't yet realized the Nile Valley is basically a full-body workout disguised as a place to live. They glance up at you, nodding in that calm Nubian way that says, "Sure, join us, it's too early to worry about anything." Historical fact alerting, Nubian pottery, making communities really did operate in close-knit clusters with skills passing through families who lived and worked near the riverbanks. You move closer and feel the kiln skin, still hot from the previous night's slow cooling. The potters aren't firing anything right now. This is more of a checking the morning mood moment. Kilns can be temperamental. Historians still argue whether Nubian firing methods leaned more towards strictly controlled heat cycles or more intuitive, experience-driven adjustments. One fringe tidbit floating around suggests some potters tapped the outside of the kiln as if politely asking whether it felt ready to work again. You watch now as the older potter does exactly that. He places his palm on the curved surface, then gives a tiny, thoughtful tap with his knuckles, tilting his head like he's listening for gossip. The kiln, of course, says nothing. Kilns usually don't gossip, but a puff of warm air escapes from a tiny vent near its base, stirring a faint swirl of ash that dances at your feet. The potter nods with satisfaction. You can't tell if the kiln told him something or if he just wanted to look wise in front of you. Either way, it's working. The sun climbs a little higher, turning the sky a soothing gradient of peach to pale gold. You feel your shoulders loosen. Even though you're supposed to be helping today, there's something effortlessly relaxing about watching other people work before you're fully awake. The younger potter grabs a long stick, stirring the ashes the way someone might lazily poke a campfire while pretending to be productive. A micro joke drifts in your mind up. If Ancient Nubia had performance reviews, this guy might be getting the enthusiasm noted, needs direction. Category. You settle onto a smooth rock, tracing shallow lines in the sand with your foot. The kiln's shape is beautiful, simple, rounded, a bit asymmetrical, as though shaped by hands that cared more about function than perfection. That's the true charm of Nubian kilns. They were often built with locally gathered mud, strengthened with straw, and relayered over years like old friends given periodic spade treatments. The older potter waves you over to show you a few charcoal fragments near the base. He explains, well, gestures, because you're still getting used to the rhythm of his accent, that the color of the ash helps him judge the previous night's firing temperature. Pale ash means the kiln ran hotter, while darker ash suggests a cooler, slower burn. And here's your quirky tidbit for this section. A few texts suggest some potters considered the smell of the cooling kiln almost as important as the visual clues. A sweeter, woody scent meant a good burn. A sour note indicated something even. You lean in and sniff. It smells like hot dust and ambition. The younger potter signals that it's time to open part of the kiln's lower vent to let a little more air circulate. You crouch beside him, lifting the small clay slab that acts as a makeshift door. A wave of heat washes over your face gently. Not aggressively, just enough to remind you that this kiln has feelings, or at least thermal inertia. You instinctively lean back, fanning yourself. He chuckles under his breath, and you earn your second joke point of the morning for realizing you look like someone who just tried to check on a lasagna at 500 degrees. As the air escapes, it carries with it the story of yesterday's work. You catch glimpses inciting faint soot streaks on the interior walls, a stray pebble baked into place, even the curved shadows of where pots sate. But the shelves are empty now. Those jars are waiting under a nearby awning, ready for today's inspections. You'll get to them later, but for now, the kiln is the star of the moment. You stand, stretching, letting the sunlight slowly wrap around you. The rising heat from the sandy ground mixes with the kiln's warmth, and you feel like you're standing between two desert sides. You breathe in deeply. The air is thick with the smell of clay ash, and the faint sweetness of Nile reeds drying in the distance. One last detail catches your attention, a small bundle of dried herbs resting near the kiln. You ask about it, and the older potter explains, with a proud smile, that it's meant to keep away snakes. Historians still argue whether Nubian potters truly believed certain scents discouraged reptiles, or whether it was more of a can't hurt, might help kind of habit. Either way, you approve. You glance around just to double-check no snake is clocking in for its shift. You take another step back, letting the kiln's radiating warmth fade from your skin. The potters begin gathering tools for the day's clay work, and the sky brightens into full morning. The kiln, now open and breathing, seems almost alive, ready for the long, steady tasks that lie ahead. You ease into the growing warmth of the morning as the potters move away from the kiln and toward the heart of their small settlement. The shift is subtle. Sand softens under your feet, the Nile's breeze nudges closer, and the quiet rhythm of village life begins to hum around you. You follow the older potter, who walks with the kind of steady, unhurried pace that announces he's done this route since before he had any opinions. The younger potter ambles beside him, swinging a bundle of reed mats with the energy of someone who hasn't yet realized he'll be carrying these for the next 40 years. As you cross a narrow footpath, soft chatter drifts from the courtyards. Women are grinding sorghum on smooth stones, the rasping sound like a cat purring at the world's slowest tempo. Children chase one another between mud-brick walls, swirling up tiny storms of dust that sparkle in the low sunlight. A donkey brays from a shaded pen, offended that morning exists, and somewhere behind a woven fence, someone cooks something that smells suspiciously like onions over a fire. Not exactly breakfast of champions, but hey, this is ancient Nubia, and options are limited. When you reach the potter's working yard, the ground is dotted with half-finished vessels resting on mats, some elegant, some wobbly, one that looks like it's questioning its own existence. You're greeted by another artisan, a woman with arms toned from years of shaping clay, and the calm expression of someone who has perfected the art of ignoring visitors who just want to help. Mainstream fact for this section: Nubian pottery traditions, especially in Lower Nubia, often involve both men and women sharing tasks, with expertise traveling through extended families and sometimes through neighboring villages. She hands you a small gourd cup filled with cool water, cooler than the air, even now, proof that the magic of porous pottery is not just theory. She nods toward the potters you arrived with, giving you a look that says, "Good luck keeping up with them." You take a sip and immediately dribble a bit of water on your shirt, which earns you the younger potter's first grin of the day. Congratulations, you've become the designated comic relief, whether you wanted the role or not. You sit on a low stool as the potters gather around a shaded area framed by reed screens. The older potter begins unraveling the bundle of reed mats, spreading them on the ground like a ceremonial red carpet, except beige, sandy, and significantly less glamorous. The others settle onto them, cross-legged, their tools neatly arranged in a few wooden paddles, small gourds filled with water, and smooth river stones worn by countless hours of shaping. This is the moment where you finally meet everyone properly. The older potter introduces himself, slowly, proudly, with a name that rolls like a wave across the Nile, rich and deep. The woman introduces herself too, smiling as she corrects your first attempt at pronouncing her name. The younger potter gestures enthusiastically, clearly hoping his name will be easier for you. Spoiler, it isn't. What matters, though, is the warmth in their voices. They talk about the day ahead, their hands already beginning to move in habitual motions, tapping clay, smoothing edges, testing moisture. There's a quiet harmony here, a sense that every potter knows exactly when to speak and when to let the sounds of shaping clay fill the space. Historians still argue whether these communal work patterns developed from practical necessity or deeper cultural ideals about shared craftsmanship. From where you're sitting, it feels like both. The woman potter leans over a half-formed jar and begins trimming uneven edges with a shard of broken pottery. You notice how precise her movements are. Slow, deliberate, yet relaxed, like she's performed this action 1,000 times and still finds it oddly satisfying. You try the motion yourself on a small lump of clay she offers. The clay sticks to your fingers immediately, because apparently ancient Nubian clay has a personal vendetta against beginners. She laughs softly and hands you a bowl of water to wet your hands. You try again, this time getting the surface slightly smoother, though still lumpy enough to qualify as crustic. Quirky tidbit: some archaeologists believe that certain lumps or asymmetries in ancient vessels weren't mistakes but intentional markers left by apprentices. Tiny signatures of learning. So congratulations, your lumpy lump is officially a piece of heritage. A little farther off, another potter joins the group, carrying a stack of dried reeds for weaving jar stands. He nods at you, looks at your clay lump, and makes the kind of polite face people make when they're trying not to laugh, but also trying not to seem rude. You decide to pretend you don't notice. The older potter taps the ground next to you, gesturing for you to watch more closely. He talks about how potters learn from childhood, how children spend years observing before they ever wedge a real chunk of clay. You picture tiny children sitting wide-eyed, mimicking motions they won't master for decades. It's a sweet image, and also a little intimidating. You, meanwhile, have known clay for 20 minutes and already have what could be classified as a creative interpretation of a sphere. The younger potter stands and stretches, then demonstrates how they choose their working posture for the day: cross-legged for coiling, kneeling for smoothing, and a sort of half squat for tasks requiring leverage. He tries to get you to mimic the half squat. You attempt it and immediately regret every decision leading to this moment. Joke number 2: there's a reason ancient potters never invented ergonomic chairs. They were too busy inventing ergonomic thighs. Nearby, chickens peck at the ground, completely unfazed by your existential squatting crisis. A rooster struts through the courtyard with a confidence you can only aspire to. A pair of goats observe you with unsettling intensity, as if they're grading your posture. You stand back up, brushing off your skirt or tunic or whatever imaginary garment you're wearing in this historical fantasy. The potters begin discussing plans for larger jars needed by a neighboring household preparing for a wedding. You listen as they talk about shapes, thickness, and decorative patterns. Geometric lines, subtle dimples, faint impressions made by basketry tools. Comfort. There's a soft bickering about whether they should adjust the base with this time. Historians still argue whether decorative changes in Nubian pottery, signaled community events, or simple maker preference, and clearly, so do these potters. The woman potter settles the argument with a single raised eyebrow, a powerful technique passed down through generations. She resumes shaping a rim with graceful strokes, and the conversation flows back into comfortable banter. You feel your shoulders loosen again. The courtyard, the tools, the laughter, the smell of wet clay, it all blends into a southern rhythm. You've only been here a short while, but the potters treat you as if you've been sitting on these reed mats your entire life. And as the sun climbs a little higher, you realize that meeting these artisans isn't just an introduction, it's an invitation into a world where craft, community, and calm coexist in perfect balance. You stretch your legs as the potters rise from their reed mats, brushing clay dust from their palms. The older potter gestures toward the riverbank, and the group naturally begins drifting in that direction, following a path worn smooth by countless trips for raw materials. You fall into step behind them, your sandals kicking up light puffs of sand with each step. The village sounds fade into the background, a low hum of grinding stones, clucking chickens, and morning voices settling into their daily patterns. The Nile glimmers ahead, wide and steady, its surface reflecting the pale blue of a sky that hasn't yet remembered to be brutally hot. You can feel the temperature beginning its daily climb, though a slow nudge rather than a shove. The older potter leads you toward a stretch of bank where the mud is darker, richer, and thick with promise, and maybe mosquitoes. But let's focus on the promise. One mainstream historical fact to keep in mind: ancient Nubian potters relied heavily on floodplain clay deposited during the Nile's annual inundation, which left behind smooth, fine silt, ideal for pottery when properly processed. You kneel next to the potters, who sink their hands into the mud with the kind of familiarity that would make you question your life choices if you weren't already committed to the bit. The younger potter motions for you to try it. You plunge your hands into the cool clay, and the sensation hits instantly. Dense, soft, and strangely soothing. It's like nature's version of a stress ball, except messier, and less socially acceptable to leave on your desk. The potter chuckles at your delighted expression, scooping up a chunk and rolling it between his palms with practiced ease. The smell of the river mixes with the earthy scent of the clay, wet soil, plant roots, and that faint metallic tang, water, always seems to carry when it's been sitting patiently for millennia. You can hear insects buzzing lazily around the reeds, and somewhere downstream, someone calls after a runaway goat. You consider offering help but decide you're already elbow deep in mud responsibilities. The woman potter wades a few steps into the shallows, where the water is clear enough to reveal pebbles and small fish drifting between her ankles. She digs below the silt layer with a flat wooden scoop, lifting a thick slab of clay that gleams like bronze in the morning light. She nods at you, inviting you to examine the texture. You touch it, and it gives under your fingers, dense but smooth, ready for transformation. This, she indicates, is the good stuff. Historians still argue whether Nubian potters intentionally selected clay from specific depths for optimal plasticity, or whether intuition guided their choices. Standing here, watching these artisans handle the river's gifts with effortless certainty, you lean toward intuition. Some people just know when mud is in the right mood. A quirky tidbit: certain communities believed that the best clay came from spots where waterbirds frequently gathered, assuming that the constant churning of their feet made the sediment finer. You look over at a cluster of herons nearby. They glance back at you, maintaining the kind of judgmental eye contact only birds can manage. You make a mental note to thank them for their inadvertent contributions to pottery science. The older potter hands you a woven basket, the kind used to carry clay back to the workyard. You fill it clumsily, discovering quickly that wet clay weighs approximately, kilograms. As you lift the basket, your arms wobble like reeds in the wind. He steadies the load with a gentle hand, giving you a sympathetic smile. Joke number one turns out, Ancient pottery wasn't invented by people who skipped arm day. With baskets full, the group trots back up the path. You try to keep pace, but clay gathering muscles apparently aren't something you can manifest instantly through optimism. You trail slightly behind, enjoying the view of the river one last time before the bank disappears behind low dunes. By the time you return to the courtyard, the sun has climbed high enough to start reminding everyone of its power. The potters empty their baskets onto a smooth patch of ground where the clay settles into dark, glossy mounds. The sight is strangely satisfying, like watching a baker dollop perfect scoops of batter onto a tray, except far heavier and much less delicious. The woman potter kneels beside the pile and cuts into it with a shard of pottery, revealing layers of color and consistency. She gestures for you to come closer and points out tiny flecks of plant matter, stones, and bits of shell. These impurities, she explains with a patient tone, must be removed if the clay is to shape into vessels that won't crack in the kiln's heat. She presses a clump into your palms, encouraging you to feel for grit. You roll it between your fingers, and sure enough, it scratches faintly, like sand hiding where it doesn't belong. She nods knowingly. This will be a job for sifting and kneading later, but for now, the goal is simply to gather enough raw material to last the day. The younger potter dumps one final basket onto the pile and flops onto a mat, with the dramatics of someone who wants to communicate exhaustion without actually being exhausted. The older potter responds by tossing him a reed brush, which is basically the ancient Nubian equivalent of, "Nice try. Now get back to work." You make a mental note that humor transcends time. As the potters begin sorting the clay into smaller heaps, you spot a small figurine resting on a nearby ledge, a tiny clay hippo with a slightly crooked smile. When you pick it up, the younger potter laughs and explains that apprentices sometimes practice shaping small animals to improve finger dexterity. Yours, he says after a moment of consideration, will probably look like something between a fish and a confused loaf of bread. Encouraging. The morning continues with the steady rhythm of clay gathering chatter. The potters point out where the Nile shifts sediment each season, how certain years produce smoother clay thanks to heavier floods, and how sometimes they'll stumble upon bits of ancient pottery washed loose by the current. Historians still argue whether these riverbank discoveries influenced evolving styles, but you can imagine a curious potter finding an old shard and thinking, that rim shape is interesting. I can do it better. Human nature hasn't changed much. As you help shape the gathered clay into manageable chunks, you begin to feel a quiet satisfaction. The Nile hums, the potters joke softly, and the sun warms your back without yet roasting it. Even the clay between your fingers feels grounding. Cool, malleable, and patient. By the time the last basket is emptied and the tools are set aside, you realize something: this simple act of gathering clay, kneeling by the Nile, laughing at your own clumsiness, feeling the earth soften in your hands, has connected you, however briefly, to a tradition stretching back thousands of years. The potters stand, dusting their hands on their tunics, ready for the next step. And you're ready too. Mud-streaked, sun-warmed, and slowly sinking into the rhythm of Nubian craft. You barely have time to shake the Nile mud from your hands before the potters start shifting the clay piles into a shaded workspace near the courtyard wall. The shade here is deliberate, stretched across wooden poles and woven mats to soften the sun without blocking the river breeze. The ground is firmer, tamped flat by years of potters kneeling and working in the same rhythmic circle. You settle onto a reed mat again, your designated spot now, judging by the younger potter's approving nod, and watch as the group prepares for one of the most meditative steps of the entire craft sifting. A wide, shallow basket appears in the hands of the woman potter. It's beautifully woven, with a subtle diamond pattern along the rim, a practical tool, but also a small piece of artistry in itself. She places it before you, sprinkling a handful of raw clay inside. You can faintly hear the soft clumps settle into place. The older potter crouches nearby, lifting another basket with a slightly different weave. A clue you're about to learn something about ancient tool specialization. Mainstream historical fact for this section: Nubian potters often used finely woven reed baskets for sifting and straining clay, removing stones, shells, and plant fibers to create a smoother, more workable material. Archaeologists have found impressions of these woven patterns on vessel surfaces, suggesting baskets like these were common in pottery preparation as well as in daily life. And the woman potter gestures for you to lift the basket and give it a gentle shake. You comply, lifting it at an angle, and the clay begins shifting like slow-moving sand, trickling through tiny gaps. Tiny stones pop to the surface. Some bits of shell cling stubbornly to the mesh. You tap the side, mimicking her earlier technique, and the clay shifts again. Less like sand now and more like a stubborn toddler refusing to go where you want. The younger potter laughs softly as he watches you negotiate with it. The woman shows you the next step. She gathers the larger impurities and flicks them into a small discard pile. Then she scoops the sifted clay into a smoother mound at her side. She nods at you, indicating it's your turn. You attempt the gesture. Your flick is, well, more of an ambitious wiggling motion. But it works. Mostly. One grain of sand shoots directly into your lap, but no one comments, which is kind. A quirky tidbit surfaces in conversation as you work. The older potter explains, through gestures and a few words, that some potters believed fine clay had a personality, that it preferred calm hands and disliked being rushed. Rushed clay cracks, he says with a wag of his finger, as if he's chiding both you and the clay simultaneously. You nod gravely, fully prepared to treat mud with newfound emotional respect. Sifting continues in a gentle, unhurried rhythm. The sound of clay grains sliding across woven fibers becomes its own kind of ASMR. Soft, gritty, repetitive. It relaxes you more than you expect. Even the goats, who earlier judged your posture with unsettling seriousness, seem to have decided you're doing okay now. One ambles over and plops down at the edge of the mat, sighing loud enough to suggest it's had a very difficult morning of existing. The young potter, eager to show off, takes a basket filled with slightly wetter clay and begins swirling it in smooth, circular motions. He tilts it to demonstrate how sediment settles differently depending on moisture content, giving you the look of someone who desperately wants to be the teacher's favorite. And honestly, he's kind of winning. Historians still argue whether certain Nubian communities preferred wetter or drier clay before the kneading stage. Some believe wetter clay allowed for finer control during shaping, while others suggest that slightly drier clay produced stronger vessels after firing. Watching the potters debate in rapid gestures and soft laughs, you realize ancient people probably had these same arguments. Not through academic articles, but through friendly shoves and exaggerated sides. As the sun climbs, the potters switch to sifting with smaller baskets designed for more delicate filtering. These look more like giant strainers with tighter, more intricate weaving. The older potter hands one to you and shows how to press clay gently across its surface with your thumbs. The clay smears into a thin sheet, and you watch as excess water and fine debris seep through, leaving behind a smooth, pliable layer. You try it. The texture is cool and velvety, but your technique causes a rogue blob to ooze over the rim of the basket. The younger potter catches it mid-drip like some kind of clay ninja and hands it back with an encouraging wink. Joke number one of this section: clay may be patient, but gravity is not. As you refine your motions, you begin noticing subtle differences in the clay's behavior. Some lumps break apart willingly, while others cling like they're staging a tiny rebellion. A dragonfly buzzes near your ear, reminding you that ancient crafts came with ancient bugs, but you wave it off and keep working. The woman potter eventually takes your basket and folds the sifted clay into a neat mound. She presses her palm into it, leaving a perfect imprint. When she lifts her hand, the clay rises slowly, almost springily, closing the imprint around its edges. She nods. This clay is ready for mixing. But there's still a little time before that stage, so the potters settle into a comfortable groove. Sifting, chatting, passing baskets back and forth with a kind of silent communication that only long-practiced groups develop. You find yourself sinking deeper into the atmosphere. The shade shifts slightly as the sun moves overhead, dappling the clay piles with soft, uneven patterns. The air has grown warmer, but the breeze from the Nile still carries enough coolness to keep everyone comfortable. You take a moment to look around. Pottery shards decorate the edges of the courtyard like small memories. A cat naps under an overturned jar, the tip of its tail tapping rhythmically on the sand. A few children wander by, stopping to watch you work. One of them points to your clay-streaked hands and giggles. The potters grin proudly, as if you're their newest apprentice, which you suppose you are. The older potter reaches for a wooden paddle and gestures toward the growing pile of purified clay. He taps the mound twice, a signal of approval, and then gives you a look that says, not bad for someone who nearly lost a battle with mud earlier. You feel strangely validated. As the last of the clay is sifted and gathered into tidy heaps, you realize this stage, though deceptively simple, is the true foundation of the craft. Without the quiet labor of sifting, without the patience to remove every stone, shell, and stubborn bit of reed, the jars could fail before they ever reach the kiln. The potters stand, stretching their backs with synchronized groans, signaling the end of this phase. You rise too, feeling both the ache and the calm that come from repetitive, mindful work. The clay is ready. The next steps await, and you, hands dusted, sleeves rolled, and heart slowing into the rhythm of this ancient craft, are ready too. You don't get more than a moment to admire the neatly sifted piles of clay before the older potter waves you over to a second work area at the far edge of the courtyard. This space is brighter, warmed by a wide patch of sunlight that seems to have claimed it as its permanent residence. Here, baskets of pale desert sand rest like sleepy, sunlit hills, each one shimmering faintly under the midday glow. The sand is fine, but not too fine, coarser than the soft silt you sifted earlier, and noticeably drier than anything pulled from the riverbank. The older potter crouches beside one of the baskets and plunges his hands into it, letting the grains cascade through his fingers in a soft, steady stream. You follow suit, dipping your hands into the sand. It's surprisingly cool, sliding over your skin like powdery wind. A tiny cloud puffs upward as you lift your palms. Your first warning that ancient pottery making comes with a complimentary light dust bath. A mainstream historical factor is the next lesson. Nubian potters learned early on that pure clay, though smooth and workable, could shrink unevenly as it dried or fired. This shrinkage often caused cracks, tiny hairlines at best, disastrous fractures at worst. To prevent this, they mixed clay with tempering materials like sand, ground pottery shards, or even ash to stabilize the structure. Today, your focus is sand, the oldest, simplest temper of all. The woman potter joins you, carrying a wooden tray with shallow sides. She spreads a sheet of sifted clay across it, forming a thin, even layer like a baker preparing dough. The clay glistens slightly in the sun, soft enough to shape but firm enough to hold its form. She lifts one corner of the tray, the gesturing for you to sprinkle sand across it. You pinch a handful of sand, but your pinch turns out to be more of a cascade, pouring a miniature dune directly onto one side of the clay. The younger potter whistles under his breath, a gentle teasing sound, and points out that even distribution matters. You try again, this time letting the grains fall in a thin, whispering rain. Much better. The woman smiles and begins folding the clay back over itself, kneading sand into its heart with slow, practiced movements. She presses the heel of her palm into the mound, pushes forward, then folds the clay in half again. You've seen people knead bread with worse technique, honestly. The process is hypnotic. Press, fold, turn, press, fold, turn. Each step creating faint popping sounds as air escapes and sand settles into place. She nudges the tray toward you. Your turn. You place your hands on the clay, and instantly the texture changes. Gone is the silky smoothness of the sifted silt. This clay now has a faint grit to it, a tiny resistance under your skin. It's not unpleasant, more like the feeling of exfoliating scrub. If exfoliating scrub were also responsible for holding a liter of water in 43-degree heat. You follow her movements, push with the heel of your hand, drag forward, fold, rotate. The clay sticks to your fingers here and there, leaving tan streaks on your knuckles that make you look like you're slowly turning into a pottery-themed superhero. Quirky tidbitting. Some Nubian potters believe that mixing sand into clay symbolically balanced earth and desert, the fertile Nile mud and the dry land that framed it. A philosophical temper, if you will. You don't know how widely that idea was held, but as you knead the gritty mixture, you begin to appreciate the poetry in it. The marriage of softness and strength, coolness and dryness, river and dun. Nearby, the older potter prepares a larger clay mound on a reed mat. He scoops sand onto it using a broken gourd as a ladle, sprinkling with the precision of someone salting a stew he's made every day for 40 years. You can tell he's the kind who knows exactly how much temper each jar size needs, just by feel. Historians still argue whether this intuitive knowledge was codified into loose guidelines in certain communities or remained entirely instinct, driven within families. Watching him, you'd believe any theory that credits muscle memory as ancient magic. He beckons you over to help. This mound is heavier, thicker, and far less polite than the one on the tray. As you push into it, your hands sink with a squelchy resistance that makes you question whether clay is, in fact, alive. You lean your weight into it. The mound does not care. It sits there like a sleepy crocodile, unmoving but faintly amused. The older potter adds one more scoop of sand, nodding gravely. Too soft, he murmurs in his accented voice, tapping the clay as if scolding it. You try to mimic his judgmental tap. The clay is unimpressed. Joke number one for this section: clay is that coworker who refuses to do anything unless 3 people supervise. Bit by bit, though, the mixture begins to change. It becomes firmer, more elastic, less eager to collapse into itself. As you knead, your shoulders loosen, your breath evens out, and the courtyard sounds fade into a kind of comfortable blur. The goats shift lazily in the sun, one bleating in a tone that's either congratulatory or complaining. You're not fluent enough to tell. The children wander past with bowls of dates, offering you one with sticky fingers before racing off again. Once the clay has absorbed the sand, the woman potter demonstrates the next test. She rolls a long coil between her palms. Smooth at first, then textured with faint sandy speckles. She lifts the coil and bends it gently. It doesn't crack. She gives the older potter a triumphant nod. You attempt the same. Your coil bends halfway. Then it snaps with a soft, tragic sound, the 2 ends flopping onto the tray like disappointed worms. The younger potter pats your shoulder, a gesture that says, "We've all been there." Even though his coil earlier looked perfect enough to frame in a museum. But you try again, adjusting your sand ratio, kneading more thoroughly, and rolling more patiently. The next coil bends nearly all the way. A small crack forms, but it's tiny, almost shy. You grin. Progress. Historians still argue whether ancient potters performed tests exactly like this or relied solely on feel. But archaeological evidence, like unfinished coils found near workshop sites, suggests some form of practical testing was common. And today, you're part of that lineage, bending mud snakes for science. The older potter finally claps his hands to signal that the mixing is done. The clay mounds now sit proudly in the shade, darker from moisture and dotted subtly with the temper that will give them strength. They're ready for shaping, but though the potters decide to let them rest a bit, clay, like people, benefits from a short break between stressful activities. The woman potter hands you a small, palm-sized ball of mixed clay. "Keep," she says, her voice warm. "Practice." You roll it between your hands and feel the grit, the softness, the potential. This small piece may never become a cooling jar, but it's a marker of the morning's progress, a tiny milestone in your growing connection to Nubian craft. You place it beside you on the mat, letting the breeze dry it just enough. All around you, the courtyard hums with midday life. The Nile breeze, the rustling reeds, the soft footsteps of potters preparing tools for the next stage. Your hands are gritty, your arms ache faintly, but you feel good, settling deeper into the slow, ancient rhythm of clay, sand, and sun. The courtyard settles into that warm, slow hush that happens when everyone knows the next step requires patience rather than speed. The older potter gestures for you to bring the now tempered clay mounds toward a wide, woven reed mat where several wooden paddles and smooth stones lie waiting. The air feels thicker here, as if the space itself knows you're moving closer to the careful heart of jar making. You lift one of the clay mounds, heavier than expected, and the weight presses comfortingly into your palms. As you set it down, you notice the reed mat has faint dents in it, impressions from jars shaped earlier in the week. These shallow dips suggest that this workspace has been used again and again for years, maybe decades. You kneel, mirroring the potters, and run your fingertips across the mat. It's worn from the sun, its surface faintly ridged. Those ridges will imprint gently on the clay, guiding its early form before it's smoothed into the curves that will eventually hold cool Nile water. A mainstream historical fact drifts through your mind as you observe the tools. Archaeologists have found wooden paddles and rounded stones in Nubian workshop sites dating back thousands of years. These simple tools allowed artisans to compress clay, strengthen it, and coax it into shapes that might otherwise distort under their own weight. Today, you get to wield them carefully because absolutely no one trusts you with the good tools yet. The younger potter places a small clay lump in front of you and nods toward the smooth stone. Press, he instructs. His tone is cheerful, but his eyes say, "Please don't launch this stone across the courtyard." You cradle the stone in your hand. It's cool, surprisingly heavy for its size, and worn flat on one side from years of work. You press it gently into the clay, rolling it slightly to create a flattened base. The clay spreads obediently outward, giving just the right amount of resistance. You repeat the motion, alternating pressure with your palm and small adjustments in angle until the lump begins to resemble a shallow dish. Uneven, yes, but recognizably intentional. The woman potter examines your progress and hums approvingly, for though she turns the dish and smooths a ridge you missed. Slow, she reminds you. Clay listens. Quirky tidbit. Some oral traditions in this region say that clay has moods, and if you rush it, it sulks, cracking or leaning to one side out of spite. Which, honestly, feels believable after the number of coils you snapped earlier. The potters here don't say this directly, but the way they handle the clay, with patience, respect, and a slightly parental tone, makes you think they at least entertain the idea. The older potter begins shaping a larger mound. You watch as he presses his thumbs into the center, coiling the clay upward, creating a rising wall that tightens with each rotation. His movements are so smooth you almost don't see the vessel growing until it's already the size of your forearm. Historians still argue whether these early Nubian jars were built primarily using hand coiling techniques or a hybrid method of pinching, smoothing, and slow turning motions without a wheel. But as you observe the master at work, you suspect the answer is Q. Whichever method produced the least amount of swearing. Inspired, and maybe a little overconfident. You attempt to raise the sides of your own dish. You press your fingers into the center and gently pinch the clay upward, rotating it slowly on the mat. The wall rises, wobbles dramatically, leans to the left like it's tired, then droops forward like a sleepy camel. The younger potter steps in quickly, cupping the vessel between his palms to rescue it. Gently, he says, eyes soft with practiced patience. Just guide, don't force. You nod, internally filing away the fact that clay is basically like a house cat. It does not appreciate being told what to do. You try again, this time letting your fingers glide along the rising wall instead of tugging. And suddenly the clay listens, stretching upward more evenly. The potter helps you correct a slight bulge, smoothing it with a bit of water from a small gourd ladle. The effect is immediate. The surface relaxes, you becoming workable again. You make a mental noting water is the mood stabilizer of ancient pottery. Around you, the workshop comes alive with shaped forms. The potters lift their half-formed vessels and rotate them in the sunlight, watching for shadows that reveal thinning areas. They tap the clay lightly with their knuckles, listening for tonal differences that indicate density issues. You try the same and realize that every vessel sounds slightly different. Some dull, some resonant, each with its own clay heartbeat. Joke number 1 for this section arrives naturally. You give the vessel a confident tap, only to hear a faint plop, sound that can only be described as the clay equivalent of someone clearing their throat awkwardly. The potters grin as if they've heard this sound from every beginner since the dawn of time. The woman potter hands you a wooden paddle and demonstrates its use on her own jar. She supports the inside with a smooth stone, then taps the exterior with rhythmic, gentle strikes. The jar firms visibly, its walls evening out, its shape becoming more reliable. You imitate her, placing the stone inside your growing vessel. It fits snugly, pressing outward as you tap the paddle along the outer curve. Tap, tap, turn. The rhythm is soothing, almost musical. The sound of wood on clay blends with distant goat bleats, children laughing near the riverbank, and the steady breeze from the Nile carrying a hint of coolness. You find yourself settling into a calm concentration, your hands learning what to do long before your thoughts catch up. At one point, your paddle taps too hard, and the jar responds with a faint crackle. A warning, not a disaster. The older potter raises a finger, as if lecturing a toddler. Kindness, he says. Even clay wants kindness. You sigh, making a sincere mental promise to treat this vessel like a fragile baby bird. Gradually, the shape strengthens, the walls even out, the wobbling decreases. By the time the sun shifts, your first jar, sits steadily on the mat, a little lopsided but undeniably jar-shaped. You stare at it, feeling a warmth unrelated to the weather creeping into your chest. It's not perfect, it's not even symmetrical, but it stands. The potters appraise it, nodding in unison. The woman pats your arm. The younger potter gives you a thumbs up that feels like a gold star. Even the older potter grunts approvingly. High praise from someone who has seen thousands of jars in his lifetime. You sit back on your heels, letting the hum of the courtyard wash over you. The clay beneath your nails, the faint grit on your palms, the weight of the tools, all of it grounds you in a moment far older than anything in your daily life. Your vessel waits beside the others, already beginning to dry at the edges as the sun leans warmer overhead. Soon, it will be ready for smoothing, then firing, then testing. But for now, you enjoy the quiet joy of creation, breathing slowly as your heartbeat aligns with the gentle rhythm of paddles in the Nubian breeze. The courtyard grows brighter as the sun climbs, and your newly shaped vessel rests beside you, its slightly uneven sides already starting to firm under the warm Nubian air. You're feeling a quiet pride, maybe even the kind of pride that makes you think, for a fleeting second, yeah, I could totally make all my own pottery from now on. Fortunately, the universe immediately provides a reality check. The older potter lifts your jar, turns it once, twice, and gives you a look that gently says, "Let's not open an Etsy shop just yet." Which brings you to the next staging thinning and smoothing the walls. The woman potter motions for you to bring your jar to a shaded spot under a stretched goatskin canopy. It's cooler here, the air soft against your skin, and the shade keeps the clay from drying too quickly. On a low wooden bench sit several tools: gourd scrapers, polished pebble burnishers, and blades made from sharpened reeds. They look simple, almost too simple. But when the woman picks up a reed blade and runs it lightly along a half-dry jar, the effect is immediating a clean, crisp shaving curls away like a paper ribbon. Mainstream historical fact time. Reed blades were widely used across ancient Nubia for fine shaping. Their edges were sharp but forgiving, allowing potters to remove thin layers without weakening the vessel walls. Archaeological digs have uncovered these tools, some with wear patterns that show just how precisely they were used. Today, one of these blades is being placed, carefully, into your hand. The younger potter kneels beside you with a proud grin, clearly ready to guide your next steps. He rotates your jar on a low clay disc, keeping his movements slow so you can see the subtle shifts in pressure. When he scrapes a thin layer from the inside wall, the sound is soft and sandy, like someone dragging a fingertip lightly across a drum. You take a deep breath, position the reed blade, and attempt your first scrape. It is not elegant. The blade digs too deeply, carving a surprising trench that the potters immediately notice. The woman winces, politely, while the older potter mutters something that is probably the Nubian equivalent of, "Well, that's certainly a choice." Still, the younger potter offers a kind smile, adjusts your grip, and guides your hand. "Light," he says, "like brushing a mosquito away." "Ah, yes, you can handle mosquito-level contact pressure." "Probably." You try again, easing the blade along the curve. This time, a whisper, then shaving curls away, landing on your lap like the world's least practical confetti. It feels good, really good, as if you've unlocked a tiny secret of the craft. You continue, a scraping, rotating, smoothing, gradually thinning the jar's walls to something more refined. Quirky tidbit enters here egg. Some ancient potters believed that scraping too aggressively invited wind cracks, tiny fractures caused by displeased spirits of the air. Whether or not that's true, the potters beside you absolutely agree that being too forceful is a bad idea. So you scrape lightly, half for structural integrity, and half because you refuse to anger any hypothetical breeze spirits today. The older potter inspects the wall thickness with a practiced pinch. He holds the jar to the light, checking for faint translucence, an indication that the clay has reached just the right thinness. You try to mimic this move with your own clay scrapings, lifting them toward the sun as if evaluating rare gemstones. The younger potter laughs softly, shaking his head. "Scrap," he says, tapping the curls in your hand. "Jar," he says, tapping the vessel. You nod solemnly, as if this is the most important distinction of your entire life. As you settle into the smoothing rhythm, the sounds of the workshop blend with the world beyond. Birds chirp from the acacia tree growing along the courtyard wall. Someone leads a donkey through the alleyway outside, the wooden saddle creaking with every step. Two children chase each other past the entrance, shrieking with laughter until an elder calls them back, presumably worried they'll crash directly into a line of drying pots again. Occasionally, a breeze drifts through, carrying a scent of river reeds and something earthy. It cools the clay in your hands, encouraging it to cooperate. For a moment, you forget everything except the soft rasp of the blade and the slow rotation of the jar. You switch tools, picking up a gourd scraper. This one is for smoothing the inside surface. You press it gently against the inner curve, and it glides with a pleasing squeak. The jar begins to feel less like raw clay and more like a polished object inching toward its final form. "Too much there," the older potter murmurs, he tapping a slightly bulged area. He hands you a polished pebble burnisher. It's smooth as river glass, warm from his palm. He demonstrates a tight circular motion, then passes the pebble back to you. You run the burnisher along the jar's surface. The clay responds instantly, compressing tighter and taking on a faint sheen. Historians still argue whether Nubian potters jars primarily for structural strength or for aesthetic appeal, judging by the satisfied hum the woman potter gives when she sees the shine forming. The answer here seems to be both. You continue smoothing, occasionally pausing when you accidentally drift into overly vigorous circles. Joke number one of this section happens when your burnisher slips, launching itself like a pebble-sized catapult missile directly into a basket of reed shavings. The younger potter retrieves it with heroic seriousness, as if rescuing a fallen comrade. He hands it back with a dramatic bow. You bow in return. The woman potter rolls her eyes with the warmth of someone used to this nonsense. By the time the sun angles lower, your jar has transformed. It is lighter now, more balanced, more carefully shaped under your unsteady but improving hands. Its surface bears faint marks of your labor. Tiny spirals where your burnisher hesitated, a barely perceptible ridge where your reed blade skittered. But the potters don't remove these. Instead, they nod in approval. Your hands. The younger potter says, your jar. You feel something soft swell in your chest, an unexpected affection for the object before you. Not because it's perfect, but because it's unmistakably yours. The potters make space for your jar on a low drying ledge, placing it between two expertly made vessels. It looks shy there, leaning slightly but standing proudly. You catch yourself smiling at like it's a child on its first day of school. The woman potter places a hand on your shoulder and gestures toward the next workspace. An area with thicker shade, flatter surfaces, and a series of small stands where jars will rest before their eventual firing. The next phase begins soon, but for now, you breathe in the clay-rich air, feeling your shoulders release a tension you didn't know they held. You have shaped a jar. You have thinned its walls. You have smoothed its surface, and the craft is slowly reshaping you too. Your jar sits on the drying ledge, its surface slowly firming under the warm, filtered light. You take a moment to stretch your back. Your posture is starting to resemble that of someone who has spent several lifetimes hunched over clay. The older potter gives you an amused side eye, the kind that says, yes, welcome to the pottery spine. Then he motions you over to a long, low bench positioned directly beneath a swath of carefully woven shade mats. This is the cooling canopy, where jars learn patience before they face the heat of the kiln. The air here is different, cooler, softer. Shadows fall in rippling patterns across the ground like shifting fish scales. As you step into that dimmer space, your body relaxes instinctively. The woman potter lifts your jar with practiced care and places it on a small wooden ring stand. The stand keeps the vessel lifted just enough to allow airflow underneath. Clever, subtle, and necessary. Mainstream historical fact for this sectioning. Ancient Nubian workshops often used shaded, ventilated areas to slow the drying process of pottery. Allowing jars to dry quickly in direct sun could cause cracks or warping. Archaeological evidence shows that many of these shaded drying structures were built with woven mats, palm ribs, or mud brick walls with airflow gaps. Simple technologies designed to tame desert heat. You kneel beside your jar, lightly tapping its rim with your knuckle. The sound is different than before. Firmer, less clay-like, but not yet the hollow resonance of a finished pot. The younger potter crouches next to you and demonstrates the correct knock test. He taps the vessels around yours, letting you hear their varying stages: soft thud, medium thok, nearly ready talk. Yours sits somewhere in the getting there category. The older potter brings a bundle of thin reeds tied neatly with linen cord. He unrolls them, revealing narrow strips used to prop jars at slight angles while they dry. He slips one under the base of a neighbor jar to adjust airflow, and suddenly you understand. This canopy isn't just a place to wait. It's a controlled environment, a clay spa. Quirky tidbit time, he now hands you a small, curved reed strip worn smooth at the tips, explaining that some potters used reeds like this not only for propping jars, but also as early humidity sensors. The reeds absorbed moisture differently depending on the air's dryness, bending or stiffening throughout the day. Your inner weather app addict is deeply impressed. The woman potter checks the top rim of your jar and gestures for you to run your finger along it. The clay feels leathery, no longer sticky but not yet stiff. This, leather hard, phase is crucial. She shows you faint cracks forming on another pot's rim, the result of a drying breeze that hit it too directly. She gently smooths the cracks with a damp fingertip. Fix now. She merlus later. You nod. Duly noted. Clay holds grudges. Your jar, thankfully, has no such cracks, but the woman still gives it a slow rotation, ensuring no part of it is taking in too much heat too fast. She adjusts the shade mat slightly, letting a subtle band of light fall across the row. The sunlight dances over the jars like the gentle passing of a warm tide. Historians still argue whether these shaded drying structures were standardized across Nubian pottery workshops or varied widely from village to village. Some believe the canopy designs were influenced by the local reeds available. Others argue that airflow was the main concern, watching the potters shift the mats with silent expertise. You suspect the real answer is that each workshop had its own rituals, a passed down through families who knew their environment intimately. You remain close to your jar, instinctively wanting to guard it from rogue breezes, clumsy goats, and the occasional child who darts too close and is immediately scolded by a potter with a glare sharp enough to cut granite. You feel protective, not because your jar is perfect, but because you've earned every uneven ridge on its body. A high-pitched bleat cuts through the quiet. One of the village goats, the same one who judged your posture earlier, approaches the drying ledge with unmistakable mischief in its eyes. You block its path with your hands. It stops, blinks, and decides you are extremely unimpressive. Its eyes drift to your jar, then back to you, then to your jar again. The young potter swoops in, claps his hands sharply, and the goat trots off with the dramatic flair of a diva who has been denied attention. Joke number one for this section practically writes itself, even the livestock are art critics. Once the goat situation resolves, your attention returns to the canopy. The older potter demonstrates how to check dryness levels without touching the jar too much. He places his palm a few inches away from the clay surface, feeling the temperature difference. You mimic the motion. The clay radiates faint warmth, not from the sun directly, but from the drying process itself. It reminds you that this jar isn't just sitting, it's transforming molecule by molecule. The woman potter taps your elbow and leads you deeper into the canopy space. Here, several finished jars rest in neat rows, each with subtle differences in shape, thickness, and decorative burnish. Their colors range from deep umber to a reddish brown that almost glows. The surfaces are smooth enough that you could glide your fingertip across them without catching on a single grain. You run your hand along one and feel a faint ripple of coolness, a reminder of the jar's calling. These, the woman says, are good for water. She taps your jar, still drying. Yours may be good. Her mouth quirks in a half smile that lands somewhere between encouragement and comedic teasing. You grin back, accepting your place in the pottery hierarchy. The potters give your vessel another gentle rotation and leave it to rest. This part of the process requires you to wait, and waiting is somehow harder than shaping wet clay. But you sit down anyway, legs folded, hands resting on your knees, letting the canopy's calm settle around you. The air shifts. A breeze moves through the mats overhead, just enough to fill the space with a rhythmic whisper. You close your eyes and listen, the quiet scrape of reed strips adjusting, the soft clinks of tools settling on wood, a low hum from the older potter as he organizes the drying stands. Somewhere, someone stirs a pot of millet porridge, and you catch a comforting whiff of toasted grain. Your jar waits beside you, drying slowly, evenly, patiently, like all things worth keeping. By the time you open your eyes again, the potters are already preparing the next step. The smoothing, shaping, and balancing have built toward this moment of stillness. Soon, your jar will need to move again, toward finishing touches, final checks, and the looming heat of firing. But not yet. For now, under this soft canopy of woven shade and faint river breeze, you rest with your creation. You sit quietly, letting the calm of the canopy wash over you, feeling the faint warmth radiating from your drying jar. The gentle breeze carries with it the scent of river reeds, sun-warmed clay, and the faint hint of baked millet from nearby hearths. Your hands, still lightly dusted with grit, rest in your lap as you watch the older potter methodically check each jar in the drying area. His movements are deliberate, almost ceremonial, a tap here, a nudge there, a gentle lift to inspect the base. Every gesture speaks of years, decades, of knowing how clay behaves in this sun, this air, this courtyard. Mainstream historical fact: Nubian potters often used the tap and listen technique to gauge drying levels. A jar that sounds hollow enough is nearing leather hard, meaning it's ready for more detailed shaping or, eventually, firing. Archaeological evidence suggests that even small tonal differences could determine whether a jar would survive the kiln or crack and collapse. Today, you get to experience that subtle skill firsthand. The woman potter kneels next to your jar and runs her hand gently along the rim. The clay feels firm but pliable. She smiles and whispers, "Good." Her voice is soft, almost conspiratorial, as if sharing a secret that only clay and patient hands can understand. You mimic her touch, tracing the rim and feeling the transformation that has taken place since your first awkward coil. The jar no longer feels like alien mud. It feels like a companion in slow creation, quirky tidbitting. Some Nubian artisans believed jars had a memory, that the way you handled them during shaping and smoothing could influence their resilience during drying and firing. Whether or not that's scientifically accurate, you decide to handle your vessel with a little extra care, whispering small apologies for your earlier clumsy attempts. The clay, naturally, does not respond verbally but seems to hold a quieter kind of acknowledgement in its firm yet forgiving surface. The younger potter brings a small brush made from bundled reeds and demonstrates how to gently remove dust or tiny bits of stray grit from the jar's surface. You take the brush and follow suit, sweeping delicately in slow, circular motions. The dust rises softly in tiny clouds, settling back onto the mat in a muted ballad. Each sweep feels meditative, like playing a delicate instrument whose notes are invisible yet resonant. The older potter begins moving around the drying jars, occasionally placing small reed shims underneath edges to subtly tilt them, ensuring even airflow. You watch him work, noting how intuitive his movements are. Historians still debate whether these minor adjustments were the result of empirical trial and error or a more formalized, inherited technique. Observing him, you suspect it is a combination inherited wisdom tuned over decades of observation and practice. Your jar, sitting on its small wooden ring, receives the occasional nudge and adjustment. You feel strangely protective, aware that this vessel has been shaped by your own hands, tempered with sand you carefully kneaded in, smoothed with reed blades and burnishers, and now patiently drying in this shaded sanctuary. It's lopsided in the faintest way, but perfectly charming for all that. You take a deep breath, letting the courtyard's rhythm lull you into a gentle awareness. The soft scrape of tools, the occasional whisper between potters, the hum of distant water from the Nile, and the faint rustle of the canopy mats overhead converge into a calming, almost musical tapestry. You notice a faint reflection of sunlight dancing off the river in the distance, fragmented through the reeds like tiny prisms scattered across the sand. It's peaceful in a way that feels suspended, timeless. The woman potter leans close and murmurs something about the final check before shaping decorative details. You're intrigued but remain seated, enjoying the pause. There's a subtle sense that this waiting period, like the drying of the clay itself, is an essential part of learning patience. After all, a rushed jar is a cracked jar, and clay has an uncanny way of reminding you that good things come slowly. Joke number one: you glance at your hands, sticky from residual clay, and think that if the clay had a voice, it would probably be rolling its eyes and muttering something about a clumsy apprentice. You smile, imagining it grumbling in muted, earthy tones. You glance down the row of jars drying under the canopy. Each vessel is unique, some slightly wider, others taller, some with gently wobbly rims like miniature hills. You feel part of this quiet, flowing rhythm, a human presence in a line of objects shaped by sun, sand, water, and hands across centuries. The courtyard hums gently around Yug, the soft clinks of reeds, the low hum of distant voices, the occasional clatter of tools reset for the next phase. The sun continues its climb, though the shade keeps the workspace pleasantly temperate. Your hands rest in your lap, your eyes half closed. The courtyard, the clay, the potters, all of it is moving slowly, deliberately, and you realize you are moving with it. Not just waiting, but participating in a rhythm older than any single story or word. Your jar sits firm, poised, and patient. You breathe in the calm, carrying it deep into your body, preparing for the next stage in this ancient, unhurried journey of shaping, smoothing, and transforming mud into something lasting and useful. The older potter rises and stretches, the slow, deliberate movements of someone who has spent decades bending, lifting, and kneading clay. He waves you over and gestures toward a low bench where several small wooden molds lie stacked. These are tools for adding subtle decorative features, ridges, grooves, and impressions that will later catch sunlight and water alike. Your jar, still resting on its ring stand, seems to anticipate this next gentle transformation. Mainstream historical facta. Nubian potters occasionally used wooden molds or simple carved tools to create consistent, decorative patterns on their vessels. These embellishments were not merely aesthetic, they sometimes aided grip, encouraged cooling evaporation, or reinforced structural integrity. Archaeological digs have revealed impressions of these patterns, preserved on jars that survived the centuries. The woman potter picks up a small wooden roller, its surface etched with delicate wavy lines. She demonstrates how to gently roll it along a half-dry jar, leaving a faint, elegant impression. The lines follow the curvature of the vessel, subtle enough that the jar could still hold water without leaking, but distinct enough to give the jar a gentle visual rhythm. You watch carefully, noting the slight pressure, the steady roll, and the soft rhythm that the tool makes against the clay. Quirky tidbit: some local tales suggest that certain patterns were intended to sing when jars were filled and water slushed inside, creating faint, calming sounds. Whether true or folklore, the idea makes you smile. Your jar could be a tiny wind instrument, just waiting for the Nile's sun and water to animate it. The older potter hands you a similar roller. Slow, he advises. Like brushing morning dew. You place it on your jar and begin rolling. At first, your pressure is uneven, producing lines that wobble like a sleepy serpent. The younger potter leans over and guides your hands gently, teaching you to maintain steady motion while letting the tool glide naturally. Joke number 1. You mutter under your breath that even serpents would be impressed by the wobbly charm of your first attempt. As you roll, you notice the clay's texture responding beautifully. The fine sand mixed in earlier helps maintain crispness in the pattern without cracking. Your thumb occasionally brushes over the surface, smoothing minor irregularities, and you realize that this part of pottery is almost as meditative as the sifting and kneading. The repetitive motion, combined with the soft sounds of rolling lines and gentle taps of hands, lulls your mind into a near trance. Historians still argue whether these decorative patterns had symbolic meaning or were purely functional. Some suggest that certain motifs marked workshops, families, or river districts, while others contend that aesthetics alone motivated these designs. Observing the subtle care each potter takes with their patterns, you start to believe in a bit of both practical, beautiful, and personal. The woman potter shows you how to add small indentations using the tip of a reed. You mimic her movements, tapping lightly along the rim. Tiny dots appear in a regular pattern, rhythmically spaced. The sensation of creating order from the plioplay is oddly satisfying. You find yourself imagining the ripple of water when this jar is filled. A tiny symphony of hums, drips, and sloshes. Your inner historian and amateur musician both approve. Meanwhile, the older potter inspects another jar in the row. He lightly presses a thumb into its side, checking wall thickness and subtly correcting minor bulges with careful finger pressure. He moves from jar to jar, a silent conductor of an orchestra of drying vessels. You try to emulate his attention to detail, running a gentle hand over the surface of your jar, noticing the way light and shadow accentuate the curves, the subtle ridges, the faint fingerprints from your earlier work. Each mark is a memory of your morning labor. A sudden breeze shifts through the canopy, lifting loose reed fibers and creating small clouds of fine dust. You pause, watching as the particles float lazily before settling back onto the clay. The woman potter tilts your jar slightly, allowing air to flow evenly across the patterned surface. It's a minor adjustment, but you sense that every subtle change matters. A reminder that even patience has its active components. You spend the next stretch quietly alternating between rolling, tapping, and observing. Your motions become smoother, more confident, almost unconscious. Joke number 2: at one point, you accidentally imprint a tiny fingerprint over a decorative line. The younger potter chuckles and says, "Your signature," as if ancient artisans left fingerprints on purpose. You grin, deciding that this accidental mark adds personality to your creation. The sun drifts higher, casting soft stripes through the shade mats. Your jar, now adorned with faint waves and dots, seems to glow subtly, the sand and the clay catching light differently than the smother surfaces. You run your fingers over it one last time, feeling the transformation from raw mud to an object of care, intention, and quiet artistry. The potters glance around, satisfied that today's shaping and decoration stage is complete. You place the jar gently back on its ring stand. It sits sturdily, a patterned lines catching the diffused light. Around you, the courtyard hums softly distant conversations, the occasional bleat of a goat. The faint ripple of the Nile's breeze through the reeds. For a moment, the jar feels alive in a very gentle, ancient way. And you, dusted with clay, hands tingling from careful work, and heart quietly swelling with achievement, realize the rhythm of this workshop. Kneading, shaping, smoothing, decorating has started to seep into your own internal tempo. Your breathing slows, your shoulders relax, and for the first time this morning, the slow passage of time feels like a reward rather than a requirement. The shade of the canopy deepens slightly as the sun inches westward, creating soft diagonal lines across the drying ledges. Your jar sits among its companions, still firm but patiently awaiting its final firing preparation. The older potter gestures toward a low table where a shallow basin of water rests. Small gourd ladles float beside it, and polished stones line the edge. Today, you'll learn one of the most subtle techniques in Nubian pottery: final surface finishing and moisture balancing before firing. Mainstream historical fact: Nubian potters frequently applied gentle water to leather hard clay to control drying rates and aid in final smoothing. Too much water, and the vessel could slump. Too little, and cracks could form. Archaeological evidence of slight fist polishing and then water applications suggests this step was routine in workshops along the Nile. The woman potter dips a finger into the basin, flicking a tiny amount of water onto the surface of a nearly finished jar. She begins rubbing it lightly along the side, smoothing subtle ridges and harmonizing minor bumps from the earlier shaping and decorating. You watch, noticing how the dampness slightly darkens the clay, highlighting its natural grains and the faint speckles of sand within. The jar almost seems to breathe under her touch. Quirky tidbit: some artisans believed that water applied at this stage could imbue the jar with a kind of cooling spirit, enhancing its ability to store water effectively. While it's unclear whether this was symbolic or functional belief, the careful ritual of dampening and rubbing the clay adds an almost meditative quality to the process. The older potter passes you a small gourd ladle, light. He instructs, tilting it so just a whisper of water touches your jar. You mimic him, letting the water slide over the surface in soft arcs. Immediately, you feel a delicate bond forming between your hands and the clay, like a conversation in which every stroke communicates care. The clay's surface grows smooth, slightly reflective, and undeniably alive in texture. Historians still debate whether this water rubbing stage was a widespread standard or more a local Nubian innovation. Some pottery shards from archaeological digs show evidence of similar water polishing marks, suggesting it could have been an essential step in water carrying vessels. Watching the demonstration and feeling the effect firsthand, you gain a newfound respect for the precision and patience required. Once your jar has received its gentle misting, the woman potter introduces the burnishing stones. These smooth, oval pebbles, polished by river currents for generations, are applied in a slow, circular motion to the jar's exterior. You hold one in your palm, noting its comforting weight and cool texture. Rolling it across the damp clay, you notice the surface compressing and darkening, a subtle sheen beginning to emerge. Each stroke requires careful pressure. Too hard, and you risk distortion. Too light, and the sheen won't form evenly. The younger potter demonstrates a minor technique, rocking the stones slightly side as you roll to even out micro bumps from previous shaping. You imitate him, feeling the clay respond like a pliant, living material. Joke number 1 on, it occurs to you that your hands are covered in so much mud that, if you were to suddenly shake them, you could probably sculpt a tiny replica of yourself on the spot. You laugh quietly, the sound blending with the soft courtyard ambience. A faint breeze drifts in, shifting the mats overhead. Tiny dust particles hover in the light, settling softly on the jar. You pause, letting the moment stretch, watching sunlight and shadow play along the burnished surface. There is a strange, quiet satisfaction in knowing that each ridge, each smoothing stroke, each careful dab of water is a direct imprint of your efforts. Your fingerprints woven into the vessel's very being. The older potter checks the interior wall thickness, giving a soft nod of approval. He gestures for you to feel the firmness yourself. You press your fingers lightly along the walls, marveling at how much stronger the clay has become after careful tempering, drying, and smoothing. The jar is no longer a raw, yielding lump. It is a confident, ready-to-be-fired vessel. The woman potter leans over to offer one last piece of advising, a check for evenness. Your hands tell the story. You run your fingers along the rim, noticing tiny variations in thickness and making micro adjustments with the gourd ladle. The tactile feedback is soothing, almost hypnotic, drawing your mind entirely into the present. Historians still argue about whether Nubian artisans deliberately imparted slight asymmetries for functional purposes, such as improving grip or stabilizing evaporation. You shrug mentally, deciding that the natural irregularities in your jar are its personality, a gentle imperfection that makes it truly yours. The sun dips slightly lower, casting golden highlights across the courtyard. Your jar, now fully smoothed, burnished, and lightly moistened, catches the light with a soft, glowing richness. Around you, the potters prepare additional vessels for similar finishing. You settle on the mat, observing their rhythms, inhaling the warm, earthy scents, and letting the slow, methodical pace of the workshop seep into your bones. Your jar rests confidently beside you. It has been kneaded, tempered, shaped, patterned, and polished. Each stage was deliberate, slow, and meditative, and now, in the soft light of the late morning, it seems to radiate quiet satisfaction. You lean back slightly, allowing the gentle hum of the courtyard. The wind, the distant river, the subtle footfalls of potters, to lull your thoughts into a peaceful, almost drowsy cadence. Joke number 2, you glance at your hands and think that if anyone ever claimed you couldn't make art with mud, these fingers, coated in centuries of Nubian tradition, might just argue otherwise. You smile quietly, feeling the subtle, almost sacred rhythm of creation settling deep within you. The afternoon sun begins to soften, filtering through the canopy in lazy streaks that dance across the drying jars. Your jar sits patiently, catching the muted light on its burnished curves. The older potter approaches, a low hum of concentration vibrating through his movements, and signals that it's time to begin the next gentle yet essential phase, the initial inspection and minor adjustments for balance and symmetry. Even a nearly finished vessel can betray subtle imbalances that might worsen during firing, and this stage ensures the jar has the best chance to emerge intact from the kiln. Mainstream historical facta: Nubian potters often performed a meticulous pre-firing check, lightly weighing vessels, adjusting rims, and ensuring walls were consistent. Archaeologists studying workshop sites have found evidence of small wooden supports and balancing tools designed to correct asymmetries before firing. a practice that helped reduce breakage rates. You kneel next to your jar as the older potter demonstrates. He lifts it carefully, tilts it ever so slightly, and places it back. He points to the rim, indicating a slight lean. You examine it, feeling the subtle difference in thickness and the tiny slant that wasn't obvious until you lifted it. Using the flat edge of a reed blade, you adjust the rim with gentle nudges, pushing and coaxing it into a more even alignment. The clay, firm yet pliable, responds almost instantly, reshaping with a soft resistance that reminds you of elastic bands slowly returning to form. Quirky tidbit: some ancient Nubian artisans believed that jars could lean toward trouble if left unchecked, an amusing metaphor for vigilance in craft, while more likely a whimsical explanation for uneven drying or poor construction. You find yourself adopting the idea, treating each adjustment as a small act of encouragement rather than correction. The woman potter introduces a delicate leveling technique using a thin wooden paddle. She presses lightly along the jar's surface, rotating it gently in her hands. You mimic her movements, noting how even minor pressure can subtly shift clay, evening out bulges and smoothing faint irregularities. The process is quiet, almost musical: paddle, rotate, tap lightly, adjust, repeat. Historians still debate whether these precision adjustments were standard across all Nubian communities or varied regionally based on available tools and workshop tradition. Observing the potters, it's clear that regardless of formal rules, attention to detail was paramount. Every touch is purposeful, a dialogue between hand, clay, and the anticipated fire. The younger potter gestures for you to balance the jar on a reed shim, lifting one side ever so slightly to check stability, and your fingers feel the subtle tilt, and you adjust minutely until the vessel rests flat. The sensation is oddly satisfying, like tuning a small instrument. The jar seems to settle under your hands, almost as if acknowledging your careful attention. Joke number one: as you make tiny adjustments, you imagine your jar sighing softly, muttering something like, "Finally, someone who respects my curves." You grin at the thought, feeling an unexpected companionship with this humble piece of mud and sand. Next, the older potter demonstrates a soft percussion technique, tapping gently around the vessel's circumference to listen for tonal differences. You try it, lightly running your knuckle over the rim and sides. A faint echo responds from the clay. Some areas sound slightly duller, others resonate softly. The subtle variance guides further minor corrections. You realize that this auditory feedback, coupled with tactile awareness, forms a silent, meditative conversation between potter and vessel. The woman potter returns with a small, damp cloth. She shows how to gently polish minor imperfections, compressing the clay surface to remove micro fractures or tiny rough patches. You follow along, feeling the smoothness deepen beneath your fingertips. It's a delicate dance. Press, rotate, glide, and each movement encourages uniformity while maintaining the jar's unique character. Quirky tidbit number tog: some artisans would lightly score a jar in a spiral pattern during this stage to subtly guide water flow and evaporation during future use. While your jar doesn't require this, the woman demonstrates on a neighboring vessel, and you watch the delicate spirals shimmer in the soft sunlight, the evidence of functional artistry entwined with aesthetic grace. Time seems to slow as you move from adjustment to polishing, each motion rhythmic, measured, and calming. The hum of the courtyard, the soft shuffle of reed mats, distant children playing, goats drifting in the shade, forms a tranquil backdrop. You notice how your own breathing has synced to the gentle cadence of clay manipulation, and for a moment, the world narrows to this small, shaded canopy and the jar in front of you. Finally, the older potter steps back. He gives a nod of approval, subtle but unmistakable. The woman potter adjusts the jar one last time, rotating it gently so the light catches the burnished surface evenly. Your hands, though dusty, feel lighter, almost as if they've absorbed some of the calm from the jar itself. You lean back, observing the courtyard, the row of drying vessels, and the slow, deliberate rhythm of these masterful hands at work. Your jar is now balanced, polished, and subtly prepared for the final drying stage before firing. It is not perfect. It bears the faint fingerprints of your morning labor, but it is alive with intention, ready to continue its slow transformation under the patient watch of the Nubian potters. The afternoon air deepens into a mellow warmth, carrying the soft rustle of reeds and the faint scent of sun-baked clay. Your jar rests on its stand, burnished, leveled, and subtly patterned. A quiet testimony to your morning's effort. The older potter approaches, carrying a shallow wooden tray lined with fine sand. He places it on the mat beside you and gestures toward your jar. Today, you'll learn the subtle art of final stabilization, a process designed to ensure the vessel dries evenly without warping or cracking. Mainstream historical facting. Nubian potters often used sand or fine ash beds to provide even support during the last drying phase. Archaeological evidence shows depressions and sediment where vessels were placed, indicating that careful attention to surface contact and airflow was a common practice to prevent stress fractures before firing. The woman potter demonstrates, gently lifting your jar and placing it on the shallow sand bed. The grains cushion the base and conform to its shape, preventing wobble while allowing slight airflow underneath. You mimic her movements, feeling the sand yield softly beneath your fingers. There's a soothing texture to this, fine, yielding, yet supportive. You realize that drawing isn't just passive, it is a subtle collaboration with earth, sun, and time. Quirky tidbits. Some artisans joked that the jar sleeps on a sandy mattress to recover from its shaping trauma. You chuckle quietly, imagining a tiny clay snooze with a minuscule pillow and blanket of fine grains. Your jar seems to rest more confidently as you smooth its sides one last time, guiding minor bulges into gentle curves. The older potter taps the jar lightly, listening for any dull spots in the tone. Your fingers hover above the rim, following his motions. Taps and subtle nudges reveal where clay may still be uneven. The adjustments are minor but precise. Historians still argue whether these auditory checks were formalized in written guides or passed entirely through oral tradition. Observing him, it's clear that decades of practice turn intuition into an exact science. You take the small reed spatula the woman potter offers and run it along the jar's base. Tiny grains of sand cling to it, helping even minor thickness variations. It's hypnotic. The smooth glide, the soft scrapes, the gentle feedback of clay responding to touch. Your hands move with surprising confidence, guided by the quiet rhythms of the workshop. A breeze floats through the canopy, carrying whispers of distant river water and the soft clinks of other vessels being adjusted. You pause to appreciate this momentum, the tactile sensation of shaping, the smell of drying clay, and the subtle warmth of sun on your skin. It's almost meditative. Joke number 1. As you straighten a slightly lopsided rim, you imagine your jar muttering, "I'm awake now. Thanks for the mattress." And you laugh softly at the absurd companionship forming between you and the mud. Finally, the older potter steps back, his hands clasped behind his back. The woman potter gives a quiet nod. Your jar sits evenly, burnished, leveled, and stabilized on its soft sand bed. The process of shaping, smoothing, decorating, and now careful drying has left it more than a vessel. It is a quietly alive creation, resonating with the patient labor of human hands across centuries. You lean back on the mat, feeling the gentle cadence of the workshop seep into your own rhythm. Every tap, swipe, and rotation has become a slow, meditative practice. Your jar rests as if breathing alongside you, a small triumph of patience, care, and the gentle touch of ancient artistry. The sunlight shifts again, now slanting lower in the sky, warming the courtyard in honeyed stripes. Your jar rests on the sand bed, fully burnished, patterned, leveled, and stabilized. You sit beside it, inhaling the faint, earthy scent of dried clay, noticing how the gentle breeze teases fine dust off the reed canopy above. This moment is quiet, meditative, and pivotal. The jar is almost ready for its final preparation before firing, yet it requires patience and careful observation to avoid the slightest misstep. Mainstream historical fact: Nubian potters recognized that uneven drying could lead to warping or cracking in the kiln, so they often rotated and lightly adjusted vessels during this late afternoon period. Archaeological studies show evidence of jars being moved slightly daily, with subtle supports placed beneath edges to ensure even moisture evaporation. The woman potter kneels beside you and demonstrates the gentle rotation technique. She cradles the jar with her palms, lifting it slightly, then rolling it a quarter turn. This small motion redistributes the clay's moisture, ensuring the walls dry uniformly. You imitate her carefully, feeling the slight resistance of the firm yet pliable vessel. Each rotation is slow, deliberate, and oddly comforting, like turning the pages of a very thick, very quiet book. Quirky tidbitting. Some workshop stories claim that jars can develop lazy sides, if left unrotated, sagging ever so slightly, as if nudged by the Nile spirits themselves. You can't help but smile, imagining your vessel gently huffing, leaning over as if to nap, awaiting your next rotation. The older potter taps the rim and listens intently. You follow along, learning to distinguish the subtle tonal shifts, the soft hum of firm clay versus the muted third of uneven spots. Your fingers hover above the jar, adjusting pressure slightly when necessary. Historians still debate whether these auditory tests were codified techniques or purely oral traditions handed down within families. Either way, the precision and care are undeniable. Next, the woman potter introduces a fine sand brush. It's a small, delicate brush with soft bristles, perfect for sweeping away residual dust without disturbing the burnished surface. You gently pass it over the jar, noticing the particles floating briefly before settling softly back onto the sand bed. The action feels strangely soothing, rhythmic, and repetitive, almost hypnotic. Joke number 1, you glance at the floating dust and think that, with a dramatic flourish, you could probably choreograph an entire ballet for tiny clay particles. The thought makes you chuckle quietly, adding a touch of levity to this patient, meticulous stage of crafting. The younger potter now guides your hands in checking the rim for subtle irregularities. You press lightly, noticing a minuscule high spot and smoothing it with your fingertip. The jar responds immediately, edges softening under your touch. It is fascinating how responsive clay is at this stage. Neither too soft nor too firm, just perfectly poised for final adjustments. Around you, the courtyard hums softly distant chatter, the gentle shuffle of reed mats, the occasional bleat from goats grazing nearby, and the soothing rustle of wind across the drying jars. Each vessel seems to hum in its own quiet tone, a chorus of potential and patience. You feel yourself sensing with this rhythm, breathing in alignment with the slow cadence of care. Quirky tidbit number 2. Some potters whisper small blessings over jars during these final rotations, hoping to imbue them with resilience for the kiln. You silently offer your own gentle encouragement, half superstition, half mindfulness, and notice the calming effect it has on your own pulse. By the time the sun leans further toward the horizon, your jar is perfectly poised and leveled, polished, patterned, gently rotated, and meticulously checked. It seems to radiate a quiet confidence, a subtle testament to the hours of patient work and guidance from the potters around you. You lean back, letting the courtyard's hum settle into your senses, the rhythmic practice of rotation and inspection echoing softly in your mind, a lullaby of craft, patience, and clay. The late afternoon sunlight now filters softly through the reed canopy, casting long, golden shadows across the courtyard. Your jar rests serenely on its sand bed, its burnished surface glinting faintly as the warm light caresses the smooth curves and subtle patterns. The older potter gestures toward the drying rows and motions for you to join him in what is arguably one of the most delicate parts of the process, the final moisture adjustment before the kiln. Mainstream historical fact: Nubian potters were acutely aware of the dangers of uneven moisture during this stage. Even minor differences in water content could lead to cracks or warping during firing. Archaeological finds suggest that jars were often rotated, gently misted, and subtly propped on supports multiple times a day in the hours leading up to firing. The woman potter kneels beside your jar and dips a small gourd ladle into a shallow basin of water. She flicks a tiny amount onto the jar's surface, enough to darken the clay slightly and smooth micro cracks that might have formed during drying. You watch as the liquid glides along the subtle ridges, the patterns you carefully rolled earlier now accentuated by a soft sheen. You mimic her technique, allowing a whisper of water to travel along the curves, feeling the tactile reassurance of clay responding under gentle touch. Quirky tidbit: some local myths suggest that jars drink small sips of water during this stage to prepare for their first use. While you're fairly certain this is metaphorical, it's an endearing thought, and you find yourself speaking softly to the jar. Just a little sip, okay? The clay, naturally, does not reply, but the gesture feels oddly satisfying. The older potter returns, tapping lightly along the rim and sides. The faint tonal differences guide minor adjustments. You follow his lead, pressing and rotating gently, listening for the soft, uniform resonance that indicates readiness. Historians still debate whether Nubian potters' auditory inspections were formalized teaching methods or purely intuitive. Observing him now, you can appreciate the precision and experience required to discern subtle variations in sound and texture. You pick up a polished pebble burnisher once more, running it lightly along the vessel sides. The clay compresses, smoothing out any lingering imperfections. The repetitive, rhythmic motion is quietly hypnotic, like a gentle heartbeat of centuries-old craftsmanship. Joke number one: as you polish, you imagine the jar wiggling slightly under your touch, murmuring, "All right, that's enough pampering. I'm ready for adventure." You laugh softly, enjoying the playful thought. The younger potter guides your hand in a final, subtle rotation. Each quarter turn allows air to flow evenly, further stabilizing moisture throughout the walls. You notice how the jar now feels perfectly balancing, not too soft, not too firm, and responsive under your touch. It practically hums under your fingertips, a quiet reward for hours of patient work. A quirky tidbit number two: some artisans would lightly whisper encouragements or short phrases of gratitude to jars during this stage, believing that spoken words could impart resilience. You offer a silent, gentle encouragement to your creation, feeling a deep sense of connection with it and the centuries of potters who preceded you. The courtyard around you is serene. Distant children laugh, goats nibble near the fence, and the soft wind carries the scent of sun-warmed reeds and earth. Your jar, stabilized, burnished, polished, and now lightly hydrated, seems to belong to this quiet symphony of motion and stillness. You lean back on the mat, exhaling slowly, letting the calming rhythm of the workshop settle into your own heartbeat. Your jar is nearly ready for the next stage, and you recognize that each careful rotation, each touch, each whispered encouragement has been part of a slow, deliberate dance. A dialogue between human hand and living clay, the sun, the wind, and the river itself. You rest in this quiet moment, grateful for the subtle, meditative rhythm that surrounds you. The sun has shifted further west, casting a softer, golden haze over the courtyard. Your jar sits proudly on its sand bed, absorbing the gentle warmth and filtered light, its burnished patterns glowing faintly. The older potter motions for you to step closer. It's time for one of the more meditative, almost ceremonial steps before firing fine rim finishing. This stage focuses on the jar's opening, where the rim must be even, smooth, and slightly strengthened to endure future handling. Mainstream historical facting: Nubian artisans often reinforced rims during the leather-hard stage, using subtle compressions, burnishing, or light shaping. A smooth rim reduced chipping and created a more durable vessel. Archaeologists have noted repeated rim touches on ancient jars, indicating that this attention to detail was a standard part of the potting process. The woman potter demonstrates first, holding the jar delicately in her palms and running her thumb along the edge. The clay responds like a pliant sheet, rounding slightly under her touch. You mimic her motion, pressing lightly along your jar's rim. The tactile feedback is subtly, just enough give to mold the edge, firm enough to resist deformation. Your fingers glide along the curve, feeling the transformation from a slightly uneven lip into a gracefully rounded, confident rim. Quirky tidbit: some local tales describe the rim as the jar's crown, a symbolic finishing touch that could determine its dignity and readiness for use. You can't help but chuckle at the notion of bestowing noble titles upon a humble vessel of clay, imagining a tiny coronation ceremony under the shade of the reed canopy. The older potter demonstrates a faint scoring technique along the interior edge, creating tiny grooves that will help prevent chipping. You imitate his movements, careful not to press too hard. The process is slow, deliberate, and oddly soothing. The rhythm of thumb along clay, finger along edge, rotation, inspection. It's almost meditative. A quiet cadence punctuated by the soft sounds of the courtyard. Historians still debate whether these subtle scoring techniques were purely functional or also carried symbolic meaning. Observing the potters, it's clear that both were likely intended functionality, paired with a sense of care and artistry. Your hands follow the method naturally now, guided by hours of touch, rotation, and observation. The younger potter retrieves a small, rounded reed tool and shows you how to gently compress the rim from the outside, ensuring a uniform thickness. You roll the tool along the jar's lip, feeling the clay respond instantly. Joke number 1, you imagine your jar whispering, "I feel sharper already, thank you," and laugh softly at the playful thought. Next, the woman potter demonstrates a final smoothing using a damp fingertip, rubbing lightly along the burnished exterior near the rim. You mimic her movement, noticing how the slight moisture glides the pebble's smooth surface into an even subtler sheen. The light catches your jar differently now, revealing faint patterns of sand grains and brush marks that add quiet texture to the vessel. Quirky tidbit number 12. Some workshops believed that the first touch of water on the rim blessed the jar for longevity, a subtle ritual of care before facing the heat of the kiln. You give your jar a soft, silent blessing, feeling a tiny swell of pride in its transformation from raw clay to almost ready vessel. As you finish the rim, the courtyard hums with quiet activity, children laughing in the distance, goats meandering lazily, soft shuffles of reeds, and the gentle murmur of the river carried on the afternoon breeze. Your jar, balanced, burnished, decorated, hydrated, and now crowned with a smooth rim, seems ready for the next stage of its journey. You lean back, absorbing the peaceful cadence, and feel the slow rhythm of creation sink fully into your bones, a gentle, meditative heartbeat of craft. The sun is now low in the sky, casting a warm amber glow that flickers softly through the reed canopy. Your jar rests firmly on its sand bed, the burnished patterns and carefully finished rim catching, the light like a quiet secret shared with the afternoon. The older potter signals that it's time to introduce a subtle, often overlooked step, the inspection and correction of micro cracks. Even the most carefully dried jar can show tiny fissures that, if unnoticed, may worsen in the kiln. Mainstream historical fact: Nubian potters commonly examined jars for hairline cracks during the late leather hard stage. Archaeologists have found traces of these micro cracks, along with evidence of localized repairs or smoothing, indicating that preventative maintenance was an essential part of the potting process. The woman potter kneels beside your jar, running her fingertips along the exterior. You follow her movements carefully, noting a faint, almost imperceptible line near the base. She gestures for you to smooth it with your finger, pressing lightly while rolling the vessel in tiny circles. The clay yields slightly under your touch, the tiny fissure blending back into the surface as if it had never been. You feel a quiet thrill, an almost imperceptible mastery of subtle correction, the kind that separates rushed work from considered craft. Quirky tidbit: some potters spoke of napping cracks, tiny fissures that appeared while the clay rested, supposedly caused by the jar dreaming too hard during drying. You can't help but smile at the notion, imagining your jar softly snoozing in the afternoon sun, dreaming of future water and gentle river breezes. The older potter demonstrates using a damp reed tip to inject a trace of moisture into tiny cracks, blending them into the surrounding clay. You try it yourself, carefully placing the tip against the micro fissure and letting a whisper of water seep in. The texture smooths, and the surface responds with a faint, satisfying cohesion. Historians still debate whether Nubian potters intuitively developed these micro repair techniques or whether they evolved from repeated trial and error across generations. Watching the precision and care involved, you lean toward the latter. Next, the younger potter guides your hand in a soft rotation, ensuring the repaired section remains even and aligned with the rest of the jar. You rotate slowly, feeling the subtle change in weight distribution and the reassuring firmness of your carefully attended vessel. Joke number 1: as you rotate, you imagine your jar whispering, "Finally, I look respectable," eliciting a quiet chuckle. The woman potter introduces a soft brushing technique to remove residual sand grains from the repaired area. You lift the jar slightly, brushing delicately along the curves. Tiny particles float up, then settle softly, and the jar seems to settle even more confidently onto its sand bed. The motion is hypnotic, slow, meditative, and calming, like watching sunlight ripple across a still river. Quirky tidbit number 12. Some workshops believe that speaking gently to a jar during micro-crack repair could improve its resilience. You lean in and murmur softly, offering a kind word to your vessel, enjoying the almost magical pace this ritual inspires. Around you, the courtyard buzzes with a quiet rhythm, the soft shuffle of reed mats, distant children playing, goats wandering lazily, and a gentle breeze carrying the river's scent. You lean back slightly, observing your jar now fully stabilized, subtly repaired, burnished, decorated, hydrated, and crowned with a smooth rim. Each touch, rotation, and whispered encouragement has transformed it from raw clay into a vessel with quiet personality and resilience. The golden light begins to deepen, signaling the approaching evening. You sit quietly, hands resting lightly in your lap, letting the slow, deliberate cadence of the workshop and the subtle presence of your jar sink fully into your awareness. This is the rhythm of craftsmanship, patience, and quiet pride, a gentle, meditative heartbeat shared across centuries of Nubian artistry. The amber light of late afternoon softens further, painting the courtyard with long, warm streaks. Your jar rests steadily on its sand bed, the burnished surface gleaming subtly, patterns catching the last rays of sunlight. The older potter gestures for you to focus on one of the final finishing techniques before the kill-on, edge refinement and base stabilization. Even the slightest imbalance at the base can compromise a vessel during firing, so this step demands careful observation, gentle hands, and an almost meditative patience. Mainstream historical fact: Nubian potters paid particular attention to a jar's base, often using sand beds, small wooden shims, or reed supports to ensure even contact with the drying surface. Archaeological evidence indicates repeated slight adjustments were made during this stage to prevent tilting or warping in the kiln. The woman potter kneels beside you and demonstrates how to gently press the base while rotating the jar. You mimic her motions, feeling the slight give of the leather-hard clay under your fingertips. With each small adjustment, the jar becomes firmer, more balanced, as if subtly aligning itself with gravity and the rhythm of your hands. The process is slow, deliberate, and oddly satisfying, almost like a quiet dance shared between potter and vessel. Quirky tidbitting: some artisans referred to this process as taming the feet, joking that a jar without a steady base might wander off or misbehave in the kiln. You can't help but smile at the idea of your jar prancing off the sand bed, playful and defiant, before settling back into obedient balance. The older potter taps lightly along the base and sides, listening for tonal shifts that indicate unevenness or hidden weak points. You follow, pressing lightly and rotating the jar, honing your sense of balance and resonance. Historians still argue whether these auditory inspections were formal techniques or entirely intuitive practices passed down through hands-on experience. Watching the potters, You sense that both perspectives hold truth, intuition, and experience converge seamlessly here. Next, the younger potter guides your hand in a subtle micro-adjustment using a small reed paddle. You gently press, nudging a tiny bulge into alignment while maintaining the overall shape. Joke number one: as you do this, you imagine the jar whispering, "Ah, that's better. I can stand proudly now," eliciting a quiet, soft chuckle from yourself. The woman potter hands you a tiny, soft brush to sweep away loose sand grains from the base. You work slowly, brushing carefully along the curves and under the edges. The particles float momentarily before settling back into the sand bed, and the jar seems to settle further into confident stability. The rhythm of brushing, rotating, and tapping becomes soothing, almost hypnotic, a lullaby of craft that quiets the mind. Quirky tidbit number 12. Some workshops claim that whispering a word of encouragement to a jar's base could anchor its spirit, a charming ritual that encouraged mindfulness during the drying process. You lean in and murmur softly, imagining your jar nodding appreciatively, ready for its final journey toward the kiln. The courtyard hums with tranquil life, distant children laughing, goats nibbling at the fringe of shade, the faint swish of reeds in the wind. Your jar, now fully balanced, burnished, patterned, hydrated, with refined edges and a stabilized base, seems almost sentient, quietly reflecting the hours of patient guidance, attention, and gentle care it has received. You settle into the rhythm, breathing slowly, letting the cadence of creation seep into your body, heart, and mind, a gentle meditation in mud, sun, and quiet companionship. The sun has begun its slow descent, turning the courtyard golden orange, casting elongated shadows across the rows of drying jars. Your vessel rests firmly on its sand bed, burnished, pattern leveled, hydrated, and now carefully balanced at the base. The older potter gestures toward the final inspection for surface integrity, a delicate process that requires close observation, gentle touch, and a patient eye. This stage ensures that the jar will survive the intense heat of the kiln without cracking or collapsing. Mainstream historical fact: Nubian potters routinely performed meticulous pre-firing inspections to detect subtle imperfections. Archaeological evidence from workshop sites shows traces of minor sanding, polishing, and surface compression techniques applied to jars, indicating that attention to small details was crucial for durability. The woman potter kneels beside your jar, running her fingertips lightly across the burnished surface. She demonstrates how to detect faint inconsistencies in thickness or texture, subtle spots where drying may have left the clay less compacted. You follow her motion, pressing ever so lightly, rolling the jar between your palms to feel minute variations. The process is quiet and deliberate, almost like reading the texture of a musical instrument with your fingers. Quirky tidbit: some local stories describe jars as having restless skin. During the pre-firing inspection, as if they were tiny, clay creatures testing the patience of their makers. You can't help but smile, imagining your jar wriggling slightly in full defiance before settling back into compliance under your careful hands. The older potter demonstrates a subtle correction technique using a damp reed tip. Tiny amounts of moisture are introduced to smooth minor irregularities and compress slightly weaker areas. You try it, gently inserting the reed tip and allowing moisture to blend the surface without leaving streaks or marks. Historians still debate whether such repair techniques were learned by trial and error or intentionally taught as formal methods, but you can sense the depth of skill required to execute them effectively. Next, the younger potter guides your hands in a gentle rotation of the jar, ensuring airflow and balance are maintained while inspecting. You rotate slowly, noticing the subtle changes in weight distribution and texture. Joke number 1. As you rotate, you imagine your jar whispering, "Thank you for the massage, much appreciated." And you chuckle quietly at the notion of a tiny, the grateful clay companion. The woman potter brings a soft brush, lightly sweeping residual sand and dust from the surface. You follow her lead, working meticulously around curves and patterns, the faint, A calming sound of bristles against burnished clay blends with the soft ambient noises of the courtyard, the rustle of reed mats, distant children, and the occasional bleat of goats grazing nearby. Quirky tidbit number 2. Some potters would softly hum or sing a calming tone over the jars during inspection, believing the vibration could settle the clay structure. You hum quietly, almost instinctively, and feel a gentle satisfaction as the final pre-firing checks come to a close. Your jar now rests completely prepared, burnished, patterned, leveled, hydrated, stabilized at the base, and inspected for imperfections. Every touch, rotation, brushstroke, and gentle encouragement has brought it to this point. Leaning back slightly, you breathe in the warm, earthy sense of the workshop, letting the serene rhythm of the afternoon, the movement of hands, and the quiet life of the courtyard sink fully into your senses. A gentle pause before the kiln awaits. The late afternoon light now bathes the courtyard in a soft, amber glow, highlighting the curves and patterns of your jar as it rests on its sand bed. Everything, the burnish, the delicate ridges, the leveled rim, and the carefully stabilized base, feels complete. The older potter signals that it's time to prepare the vessel for the kiln stage. This isn't the firing itself yet, but the subtle handling and placement that ensures it will emerge intact from the heat. Mainstream historical facto: Nubian potters often move jars carefully to kiln-ready positions on elevated mats or small sand mounds to ensure uniform heat exposure and prevent cracking. Archaeological evidence shows slight wear patterns and impressions on base areas that suggest intentional handling and placement for optimal firing outcomes. The woman potter demonstrates the correct method of lifting the jar. She cups it gently, supporting both base and sides with her palms. The jar feels surprisingly light yet reassuringly solid in her hands. You mimic her motions, your fingers learning to read the vessel's weight distribution, adjusting for balance. Each lift, tilt, and careful repositioning is done slowly and deliberately. There's a rhythm here, almost hypnotic, a quiet communication between hands and clay. Quirky tidbit: some workshops humorously describe the act of moving jars as teaching them to walk, suggesting that proper lifting instilled confidence for their future heat-filled journey. You grin at the notion, imagining your jar taking tiny clay steps toward its destiny. The older potter directs you to place the jar on a slightly raised sand mound, tilting it gently to ensure airflow under the base. You follow, pressing lightly to stabilize it. Joke number 1: as you adjust, you imagine your jar sighing in relief, whispering, "Finally, a cozy little hill to rest on." The thought makes you chuckle softly. Next, the woman potter guides your hands in one final polish of the exterior, compressing any remaining micro bumps. The burnished sheen deepens slightly, reflecting the soft sunlight in warm, muted tones. Each gentle stroke of your fingers reinforces the jar's form, as if reassuring it that it's ready for the next stage. Historians still debate whether such minor finishing touches were functional, aesthetic, or symbolic, but the care invested is undeniable. The younger potter demonstrates a minor ritual of orientation. Jars were often rotated so their patterned surfaces faced certain directions, thought to optimize drying and even heating. You rotate your jar slowly, aligning the patterns in a gentle, mindful motion. Quirky tidbit number 2: some potters whispered that this orientation graded the sun properly. A charming reminder that artistry function and imagination often intertwined. Around you, the courtyard settles into a tranquil rhythm. Children's laughter drifts faintly from the distance. Goats graze lazily in patches of sunlight, and reeds sway softly in the evening breeze. Your jar sits elevated, burnished, patterned, leveled, hydrated, balanced, inspected, and now carefully positioned for the kiln, a culmination of hours of patient, deliberate care. Leaning back, you breathe deeply, absorbing the warm, earthy sense and quiet hum of activity. Every tap, brushstroke, rotation, and gentle encouragement has led to this moment. The jar seems alive in a subtle, profound way, embodying the rhythm, patience, and meditative flow of Nubian pottery craftsmanship. a quiet heartbeat connecting human hands to centuries of tradition. The courtyard is bathed in the soft glow of the approaching evening, the sun now low enough that shadows stretch languidly across the rows of drying jars. Your jar, perched on its gentle sand mound, seems to bask in the warmth, burnished patterns glinting faintly in the amber light. The older potter approaches, signaling that it's time to prepare for the kiln transfer, a delicate and deliberate process that requires careful hands and a calm mind. Mainstream historical facting: Nubian potters often used wooden supports, sand beds, or reed platforms to gradually acclimate jars before firing. Archaeological evidence reveals impressions of these supports, suggesting that careful pre-kiln placement minimized stress and breakage during the intense heat. The woman potter demonstrates first, cupping a jar in her hands, lifting it gently, and placing it on a small transport reed. She moves slowly, ensuring the weight is evenly distributed and the jar's base remains perfectly balanced. You mimic her motion, feeling the gentle give of the sand beneath and the reassuring firmness of the vessel. Every lift and tilt is measured, almost ceremonial, a quiet rhythm of trust between human hand and clay. Quirky tidbit: some workshops jokingly referred to this as teaching the jar to travel, suggesting that jars needed a little guidance before their fiery journey. You smile at the thought, imagining your creation stepping delicately across the courtyard, careful not to stumble. The older potter guides you to a small cluster of jars ready for the kiln. Using subtle nudges and careful hands, you help position your jar among them. Joke number 1: you mutter softly, imagining the jars gossiping among themselves. Ah, a new neighbor with stylish stripes, and chuckle quietly. Next, the woman potter demonstrates one last light inspection. She runs her fingers along the rim sides and base, checking for any tiny imperfections missed during previous stages. You follow her lead, performing the same gentle sweep. The tactile feedback is subtle, each tiny ridge or depression revealing itself under careful touch. Historians still debate whether these final pre-firing inspections were standardized practices or passed orally from master to apprentice, but it's clear that skill and intuition were inseparable. The younger potter helps you lift your jar once more. Ensuring the wake feels balanced, you transfer it to its designated spot near the kiln. You notice the slight differences in temperature, cooler shadows versus sun-warmed surfaces, and adjust your grip accordingly. Quirky tidbit number 12: some artisans believed jars could sense uneven temperatures and shift their stance slightly, though the real effect is simply careful handling. As your jar settles in its place, you step back and observe the rowing. Each vessel, burnished and patterned, appears quietly confident, ready for the kiln. The courtyard hums gently. Distant children, bleating goats, and the soft swish of wind through reeds. You lean back, breathing in the earthy scent and warm light, feeling the rhythm of the workshop permeate your body. Your jar, the product of hours of shaping, burnishing, decorating, hydrating, balancing, inspecting, and gentle encouragement, now stands ready for its final transformative stage. You feel a profound connection to the centuries of Nubian potters who performed these same careful, meditative movements. Hands shaping clay, hands guiding, hands teaching patience and precision in perfect harmony. The evening light deepens, softening into a mellow amber that filters through the reed canopy, painting the courtyard in gentle, elongated shadows. Your jar rests confidently on its sand mound among the other vessels, each burnished, patterned, and leveled, ready for the kiln. The older potter approaches, gesturing toward the final preparations for firing. This stage isn't about heat yet. It's about setting the jars in their optimal positions and performing one last quiet, meticulous inspection. Mainstream historical fact: Nubian potters carefully arranged jars in pre-firing zones, often on slightly raised platforms or sand beds, to ensure even exposure to heat. Archaeological evidence indicates repeated placement adjustments, emphasizing the importance of positioning for structural integrity during firing. The woman potter demonstrates the gentle lift and placement technique. She cups a jar in both hands, feeling its weight and balance, and moves it to a nearby platform. You follow her motion slowly, adjusting your grip as you sense the subtle shifts in the jar's weight distribution. Each careful movement reinforces the relationship between hands and clay, a dialogue of patience, touch, and attentiveness. Quirky tidbits, some potters humorously called this lining up the soldiers, imagining jars standing in formation, ready for battle against the heat of the kiln. You grin, picturing your jar standing proudly, shoulder to shoulder with its companions, bracing for the fiery adventure ahead. The older potter guides your hands in a final rotation of the jar, ensuring airflow beneath the base and confirming stability. You notice the slight give of the sand beneath it, the subtle bounce that reassures you of balance. Historians still argue whether these subtle rotations were strictly functional or also served a ceremonial role, but it's clear the effect is both practical and calming. Next, the woman potter hands you a soft brush, demonstrating how to clear away residual sand or dust from the jar's surface. You sweep gently along curves and ridges, removing particles while preserving the burnished sheen. Joke number one: as you brush, you imagine whispering compliments to the jar. "You look quite regal today," and you chuckle at your own silliness, feeling the light-hearted connection deepen. The younger potter checks your jar one last time, running a fingertip along the rim and sides. You follow suit, carefully pressing and smoothing any minuscule irregularities. Quirky tidbit number 12: some artisans whispered soft encouragements to jars during these final touches, believing it helped settle the spirit of the clay. You hum quietly to your jar, feeling oddly serene as the act becomes part of your meditative rhythm. As the courtyard settles into twilight, the hum of activity softens, the distant laughter of children, the bleating of goats, the soft swish of reeds. Your jar, now fully stabilized, polished, leveled, patterned, hydrated, repaired, rimmed, and carefully placed, seems to glow with quiet anticipation. You lean back, allowing the calm rhythm of preparation and the gentle cadence of the workshop to sink fully into your senses. The vessel, though still humble clay, embodies hours of careful touch, centuries of tradition, and the meditative flow of Nubian craft. A quiet, living testament to patience, skill, and artistry. The kiln awaits, and your jar is ready. Twilight drapes the courtyard in a soft, cool veil, the sun now a fading ember behind distant hills. Your jar rests among its companions, each one carefully burnished, leveled, patterned, and stabilized, basking in the last warmth of day. The older potter approaches with a low, approving hum, signaling the moment has come for the final ceremonial checks before the firing. This is a quiet, almost sacred stage, a time to honor the craft, the clay, and the rhythm of patience that has carried you this far. Mainstream historical facto: Nubian potters often conducted a final pre-firing ritual that involved inspecting every surface, confirming stability, and gently brushing away debris. Archaeological findings at Nubian sites show slight impressions and careful alignments, indicating that these steps were integral to the survival of vessels in the kiln. The woman potter demonstrates a final lift and slight tilt, checking the jar's balance and the evenness of the base. You follow her, cupping the vessel with your palms, feeling its weight and subtle nuances in curvature. A delicate rotation allows you to observe the burnished patterns, the smooth rim, and the overall form. Each movement is slow and intentional, a meditation in motion. Quirky tidbit: some artisans describe this step as introducing the jar to the fire, imagining it bowing gracefully before the kiln, ready to endure the heat with dignity. You can't help but smile, picturing your jar giving a polite clay nod before its fiery trial. The older potter taps lightly on the sides, listening for tonal consistency. You mimic his taps with gentle fingertips, noticing faint differences that guide minor corrections. Historians still debate whether these auditory tests were codified techniques or purely intuitive skills passed down orally. But watching the potters makes the precision undeniable. Next, the younger potter helps you perform a soft brushing ritual, removing lingering sand and dust from the surface. You sweep carefully, following the gentle curves and patterns, enjoying the hypnotic cadence. Joke number 1. You imagine your jar whispering, "Ah, the spa treatment before my big debut." And you laugh quietly to yourself. The woman potter leans close, showing how a tiny amount of water can be applied along the rim and minor imperfections, reinforcing the structure and smoothing the surface. You follow, careful to avoid excess, feeling the clay respond with subtle darkening and a soft sheen. Quirky tidbit number 12. Some workshops believe these final touches infuse the jar with calm endurance, a metaphorical blessing for its time in the kiln. As the courtyard settles into evening, the soft rustle of reeds, distant laughter, and faint river breeze provide a soothing backdrop. Your jar, now fully polished, balanced, inspected, repaired, and blessed with quiet attention, seems almost alive with potential. You lean back, breathing in the earthy warmth and serenity of the space, feeling the rhythmic heartbeat of centuries of Nubian pottery resonate through the moment. The sun has nearly disappeared behind the horizon, leaving the courtyard bathed in soft twilight. The air carries the gentle scent of warm clay, sun, baked reeds, and the faint river breeze drifting lazily through the space. Your jar rests firmly on its sand mound, burnished, patterned, leveled, hydrated, repaired, rimmed, balanced, and inspected. Tonight marks the quiet threshold before the kiln's heat, and the older potter gestures for a final collective moment of preparation. A careful positioning of the jars to ensure they are ready for their transformative journey. Mainstream historical fact: Nubian potters often organized vessels carefully before firing, ensuring even spacing and airflow, with particular attention to fragile rims and bases. Archaeological evidence shows repeated positioning marks and impressions on sand or mud floors, reflecting deliberate placement practices meant to reduce breakage. The woman potter demonstrates one last lift and rotation, feeling the jar's balance and checking the alignment of patterns with nearby vessels. You follow, cupping your jar gently, tilting and turning slowly, savoring the tactile feedback of the firm clay. Each rotation is deliberate, a meditation in touch and observation. Quirky tidbit: local stories often describe jars at this stage as whispering to each other, imagining the vessels exchanging tips and encouragement before facing the kiln. You quietly picture your jar communicating with its neighbors, sharing its confidence and polished shine, and a small smile tugs at your lips. The older potter taps along the rim and body, listening for subtle tonal differences, checking for hidden weaknesses. You join in, your fingertips gliding softly, detecting faint vibrations and adjusting minuscule imperfections. Historians still debate whether auditory inspections were widespread or localized practices, but it's clear the technique required experience, sensitivity, and patience. Next, the younger potter hands you a small, soft brush to sweep away residual grains of sand and dust. You follow the gentle arc of the vessel, watching as the particles float briefly before settling back into the sand bed. Joke number 1. You imagine your jar thinking, "Finally, someone appreciates my fine texture," eliciting a quiet laugh. The woman potter demonstrates a subtle final hydration, touch along the rim and minor surface imperfections, compressing and smoothing the clay. You mimic her movements, noting how the faint sheen deepens and how the jar feels almost alive beneath your hands. Quirky tidbit number 12. Some workshops whispered small blessings or songs to jars at this stage, believing the gentle vibrations helped strengthen their spirits. You hum softly, enjoying the meditative rhythm. As the courtyard quiets with the approaching night, you step back and observe your jar. It rests confidently, fully prepared for the kiln, the culmination of hours of shaping, burnishing, decorating, hydrating, balancing, inspecting, refining, and gentle encouragement. The vessel seems to pulse with potential energy, ready to complete its transformation, while the rhythms of the workshop, the scent of clay, and the soft evening air lull your mind into a serene, reflective state. Night has fully settled over the courtyard, the last traces of sunlight replaced by a soft, silver glow from the rising moon. Your jar rests among its companions, all carefully prepared and positioned for the kiln. The older potter moves quietly among the vessels, making one final check. Tonight, you witness the culmination of days of patient labor, observation, and meditative care. Every touch, rotation, brushstroke, and whispered encouragement has led to this moment, the threshold between careful preparation and fiery transformation. Mainstream historical facting. Firing in Nubian pottery involved open air or small, controlled kilns, often constructed from mud or stone, with careful stacking of vessels to ensure even heat distribution. Archaeological studies reveal evidence of careful kiln layouts and surviving jars with uniform firing marks, reflecting the meticulous preparation that preceded the process. The woman potter demonstrates the final transfer technique. She lifts a jar gently, supporting base and sides, and moves it toward the preheated kiln area. You follow, cupping your jar carefully, feeling its weight, and adjusting for balance. Each step is slow and deliberate, a dance of mindfulness and gentle strength. Quirky tidbit. Some local stories describe jars at this stage as taking a bow before the kiln, a playful metaphor for readiness and patience. You imagine your jar nodding politely, its patterns catching the moonlight, as if acknowledging the centuries of craft that have brought it here. The older potter taps lightly on the rim and sides, listening for faint tonal differences. You imitate him, pressing gently and adjusting subtle irregularities, ensuring your vessel is perfectly poised. Historians still debate whether auditory inspections were formalized or intuitive, but the precision of the method speaks volumes about the artisan's skill. Next, the younger potter shows you how to position jars for optimal airflow and heat distribution. You follow, carefully nudging your vessel into its designated space, making micro adjustments until it sits confidently among its companions. Joke number 1, you imagine your jar whispering, "Ah, room service and perfect ventilation. Just what I needed." And chuckle softly. The woman potter guides you through one last brushing, sweeping residual sand and dust, then a final hydration touch to compress minor imperfections. Quirky tidbit number 2 in some workshops. Soft humming or quiet encouragements were offered at this stage, believed to help the clay endure the kiln. You hum a low note, feeling the meditative rhythm wash over you, a quiet lullaby of patience and craft. Stepping back, you observe the courtyard in stillness. Your jar, along with its companions, is fully prepared, burnished, patterned, leveled, hydrated, repaired, rimmed, balanced, inspected, and positioned. Each vessel seems almost alive, humming quietly in anticipation. The cool night air, soft murmurs of distant life, and faint scent of sun warmed create a serene atmosphere. You feel a profound sense of calm and accomplishment, knowing that your hands have guided clay through centuries of wisdom and subtle artistry, and that patience, care, and gentle touch have brought it to this quiet moment of readiness. The courtyard grows quieter as the night deepens, each sound softened by distance and darkness. You sit back, allowing the gentle rhythm of the day, the soft shuffling of reeds, the distant laughter of children, the quiet bleating of goats, to settle fully into your senses. Your jar rests beside you, a humble creation of clay and care, its burnished curves and patterned surfaces absorbing the moonlight in a gentle glow. It has endured shaping, smoothing, hydration, inspection, balancing, and final positioning, and now it waits patiently for its final transformative journey in the kiln. Take a slow, deep breath, feeling the warmth of your hands lingering in memory on the jar's surface. Let the tactile echoes of each touch, the rotations, the nudges, the gentle brush strokes, flow through you, leaving a calming resonance in your mind. You can almost hear the faint, quiet hum of clay communicating its readiness, a soft meditation in material form. The courtyard is serene, a living lullaby of past and present intertwining. Each jar, your jar, embodies the quiet patience of countless generations of Nubian potters, the gentle rhythm of sun and sand, and the tender care that only human hands can impart. The air smells faintly of warm earth, reeds, and sun-dried clay, each inhalation grounding you in the tranquility of the moment. Let the soft cadence of preparation and craftsmanship sink slowly into your mind. Imagine the clay, warm and pliable under your fingertips, finally at peace, resting with gentle confidence. Feel your own heartbeat match the quiet rhythm of the workshop, slow and steady, a meditation shared across centuries. You are here, in this gentle space, with your jar, the warm courtyard, and the timeless pulse of creation itself. Close your eyes, feel the serenity of the night, and let the quiet companionship of clay, sun, and human care lull you gently towards sleep.